This week, Rick Farina and Rick Mellendick, board members at RF Hackers Sanctuary, are here to talk about RF Village at DEF CON. Then we welcome Scott Scheferman and Yuriy Bulygin, did I say that right? To discuss how the stakes are raised when protecting the foundation of computing. In the security news, Pwned Piper and vulnerabilities that suck, assless chaps, how non-techie people use ARP, how to and how not to explain the history of crypto. They are still calling about your car's warranty. Master faces, things that will always be true with IoT vulnerabilities, DNS loopholes, and a toilet that turns human feces into cryptocurrency. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Can you pinpoint the 10 security gaps in your attack surface that account for 90% of your risk? It's impossible using a combination of scanners, pen tests, breach and attack simulation tools, and manual processes. But attackers can find your gaps. They perform recon and target the weaknesses with the best return. The Psycognito platform sees your external attack surface the way attackers do, eliminating blind spots. Powered by a global bot network, the Psycognito platform prioritizes your highest risk security gaps, integrates with existing workflows, and reduces operational costs. Visit securityweekly.com/Psycognito.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to our host, a man who up until tonight had no idea what a shitcoin was, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome everyone to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 705, recorded on August 5th, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left is the illustrious Mr. Larry Pesce. Nice to have you here.
Yeah. I missed last week, didn't I?
You
or
did.
Something?
No, I don't.
I was here last week.
We're old.
Who am I?
Every week is a new week.
Who are you? Get off my lawn. There are too many states nowadays.
That's it. A special guest here in the studio, now part of the CRA family, Mr. Bill Brenner, is here with us. Bill, welcome in studio.
Good evening, and thank you.
It's nice to have you here, man.
Yeah, the last time I was on the show was before video.
That's right.
Whoa.
It was audio only.
Only.
Bill's actually famous.
2008.
Quoting a ShmooCon podcaster meetup and comparing it to Klingons at the dinner table.
The head table at a Klingon wedding.
Head table at the Klingon wedding. Yes, that was the exact reference.
And he was not wrong.
No, yeah. And we've, improved. No, never mind. We're still the same. On the lines remotely, Mr. Tyler Robinson's here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Man, that was a while ago. I think I was even listening way back then. That's pretty awesome to have him on the show.
How things come full circle.
Wish I was there.
Now I get to harass Bill at my day job.
Nice.
And he does.
But it goes both ways. Bill harasses me at the day job.
Indeed
too.
it does.
Yes. Mr. Lee Neely is here with us.
Good to be here. We're enjoying that we can now do it without the tin cup and the 2 cups and the string,
Yes. There was some cups and string. There was phone lines involved in the early days, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
SC Media debuts its all-new SC Digital Experience, fully integrated with the Security Weekly podcast content and more. The new site increases the scope and scale of the original content from editorial staff, contributors, and far-reaching Cyber Risk Alliance network. You can visit scmagazine.com, check out our new look. Rick Farina and Rick Mellendick are both board members for RF Hackers Sanctuary. The RF Hackers Sanctuary is a group of experts in the areas of information, Wi-Fi, and radio frequency security with the common purpose to teach the exploration of these technologies with a focus on security. It sounds really formal and very serious, and I can assure you this will not be. Today they joined us to discuss the RF Village at DEF CON. Welcome, Rick and Rick.
Howdy, Paul.
How's it going?
How's it going, guys?
It's going good.
And nothing like having two guests that are both named Rick. This won't get confusing at all.
Right? Not at all.
No, it won't, Bob.
One of you is going to have to be Morty.
That's it. But Rick, your handle is Zero Chaos, right? Is that your I just outed you. Sorry.
It's okay. It cuts down on confusion. When somebody yells Rick in the wireless village, I tend to not look.
Yeah. But if they yell your handle.
Easier.
Zero. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Rick's the only one that calls me Rick.
Zero
Yeah.
Chaos. How did you get your start in information security? I don't know that I know the history behind it.
Oh boy, gosh! Started information security. Let's see. I went to high school and I was really bored, and I took over the computer network, kind of by accident.
That sounds like you. That's very believable.
And
story, actually.
Then they decided they didn't want me going to that school anymore, and they sent me to the university, and I did the same thing. And
Also believable.
Yep.
yeah, I really like Layer 2. Anything on Layer 2 is super fun for me. And then I also liked like radio scanners and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I ended up in wireless technologies in general, just that beautiful Layer 1, Layer 2, and it just kind of magically is all around you and you wonder what's going on. Just really keeps my interest.
So not so much on the phone freaking side of things, more on the wireless and computer when you came up on the scene, right?
Much more so. My red box kind of melted in my hands because I wasn't any good at soldering.
Yeah. I suck at soldering too.
Yeah, my phone freaking career was very short.
Nice. Rick M., how'd you get your start in information security?
Oh, wow. So in college, got had a bunch of weird years, played baseball, got hurt, and decided that computers seemed like fun and I didn't have to throw them anywhere. And then I realized how much I wanted to throw computers. First internship gave me a computer. I think the tower was 3.5 feet tall. Carried it back and forth in my back of my RX-7 and helped one of the hospitals up in Philly to put in their first WAN. Thought computers were really cool. And then around DEF CON 10 or so, from afar watched the wireless war drive, and from that point wanted to run it. So Romer eventually gave me permission after Shipley's talk, and bunch of guys, John Kelly and Thorne, sort of handed over the reins after I watched Renderman win after he could have won 3 hours sooner because he wouldn't listen to me. And we've been playing.
I think it's because his arms are really long, so his Wi-Fi antennas can go so much higher than everyone else's.
But I will tell you, watching him run down the hallway at the Riv was one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Just him running, or just because of the...
Him running with one of those works that's over your shoulder under his arm that had the password written on the bottom, but he wanted to log into it so that he could figure out the password.
you know, and I think I was probably running right behind Render.
Is that the time was that the same scene that you kicked your phone?
That was the same scene in which my BlackBerry on my belt fell out of the holder, and I kicked it across the hallway,
and it was totally fine. I mean,
well, it was the phone worked totally fine, except for the cellular radio didn't work.
Whoops.
Yep.
Oops.
Yeah. Other than that, it was fine.
That was the same year that they put the moratorium on radios in the casinos because. You know, reasons. People were in the casinos with radios.
Yep, because of reasons, right?
Reasons.
So what is the RF Hackers Sanctuary?
So it started off, so back in the days of the Riv, the villages were kind of kicked off by DEF CON. The wireless village was right at the top of the steps. Lockpick village was right next to it. And we were the first two villages. And it was just a really cool concept. Kahuna, Thorne, Mike Shear, myself, Renderman, all kind of just put this thing together. Converge was out there as well. I know, Larry, you popped in at one time.
Absolutely.
I got this wild idea that I'd get Romer, Al Potter, Bruce Potter, and Renderman in a talk on a panel together, which was one of the funniest panels ever because everybody just talked over each other for an hour. And everybody was right. So that sort of started off the idea of talks. And on top of talks, we had the Capture the Flag started up that year with a couple little games. And we were like, well, you know what? This is kind of cool. A lot of people seem to like it. And we've been filling rooms ever since. But we started off the Wi-Fi village. Then we realized that we were doing a lot more than Wi-Fi with Bluetooth. We were doing some signaling at that point. Zero brought in a bunch of radios as a ham. And we became the wireless village, and then we realized that really wasn't enough. Became the RF village, and this year DEF CON finally called us the RF village, which we're pretty psyched about. So RF Hacker Sanctuary was the nonprofit that we built to basically run the contest so that we had a little bit of protection between us and the contestants and the conferences and everything else. And at prime pre-COVID, I think we were doing 7 conferences a year. I'll let Zero talk about his amazing innovations that he's brought in, but we're now able to do 20 a year if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Zero, tell us about your amazing innovations now. Now I'm on the edge of my seat.
And this is to my question. You're like, nowadays and COVID, RF Village is up and running at DEF CON right now. And how the hell do you do a CTF remote like that?
Your antenna is not big enough, Larry. I think that's the problem.
I know.
That was
I know.
Perfect response.
Yeah, between Zero, between you and I, we make a full man, right?
You know it.
Hey, I heard that joke once.
I know. I heard. What credit where credit's due. Rick gave me that joke. I won't say which one.
There was a topic, right? And the topic was, how did we get here, right? So for a lot of years, we built the CTF and we tried to maintain it, and we tried to make it new and exciting and add things to it every year. And we said to ourselves, this is really cool for the people that are here. We'd roll in 6 or 8 Pelican cases, and they're just full of radios, and we'd pop them open and plug them in, and it was great, except for the rooms were full, and there were people playing in the hallways, and the goons were clearing the hallways, and there was never enough room. And, this is mostly Rick's brainchild. I just kind of help him build stuff. And he said, it'd be really cool if we built a home game. I'm like, you're an idiot. There's no way we can do that. And then I went back to thinking about it. Like, this is a great idea. We should do that. And it went like that for about 3-4 years, I think. And it was just one of those things, because we were spending so much time innovating at the in-person conferences, we never had time to do it, right? We don't have a very big development team. It's me and some volunteers who help maintain some of the additional challenges. And then they canceled everything. We were given the same amount of notice last year as the general public. I think we were given 1 whole hour longer that DEF CON was going to be completely virtual. And so I basically called up Rick. I'm like, hey, how you've been talking about the home game? I've been noodling it. Let's try to build this. And we pulled in one of our friends, Redbeard, who has a lot more cloud experience than I do for a lot of solid reasons. And he helped me to build my idea. And now that idea is running, I think, 50 players right now simultaneously in AWS. Each player gets their own kind of magic fake virtual environment. And as far as they can tell, they're like SSH'd into my basement full of wireless gear, but it's all pretend.
So that would imply you can virtualize Wi-Fi adapters and access points.
Yes, you can.
Tell us more about that. That's intriguing.
It's pretty crazy, actually. The Linux developers for the driver stack, Mac 802.11, built a fake driver to test to make sure that the drivers are right. Mm-hmm. And what this fake driver does, it does more than just, your regular harness testing stuff. It actually implements all of the features necessary, including a complete virtual airspace. You can put things on different channels. They will act like they are in different channels. You can separate them. You can cause packet loss. You can do everything you can in the real world from behind the scenes to make a realistic Wi-Fi environment if you want to.
Because whether the bits are in the air or generated within the driver doesn't matter to the computer. The computer doesn't know if the bits are in the air or whether they're being generated by a computer locally in the driver. Yeah,
exactly. Conceptually, it's like running a pigtail from a signal generator right into a software-defined radio or an oscillator.
Right.
It's conceptually the exact same thing. One thing Rick forgot to mention, then I'm going to hand it back to him because he is the genius behind this, is not only could we SSH in last year and run AeroDump and Airmon and all the basic command line tools, but now from an iPad, you can actually run a full version of Black Arch, Kali, Pen 2, and Parrot, right? Yep. I'm running Kismet right now in the Capture the Flag, capturing packets with 73 devices showing up in it. And it's just right out of a web browser. So it's absolutely mind-blowing, breaking physics all the way around.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time optimizing this and trying to make it clean. We have a full SSH environment that we've had for the last year, But over that year, we've actually gotten a full VNC environment. So you can literally just open this up in your web browser on your tablet, and you can get like you're plugged into a Linux computer somewhere else. So you've got the whole game right there available to you. You've got all the software-defined radio tools pre-installed, and you can connect to basically, we also have a bunch of software-defined radio tools. You can't virtualize those radios in the same way you can the Wi-Fi ones. So the way we do it now is we actually use a ZMQ socket, and we send raw IQ data, which is what the SDRs receive, over that socket. So you essentially tune by picking a port, and as you connect to that port, it sends you a bunch of data. The ones that have our stuff on them have a spectrum paint of the RFHS logo, and then it has some repeating signal that you're supposed to decode.
That's awesome.
Nice.
That's really cool.
Now, Zero, and I'm saying Zero to keep this straight between the Ricks. On the ZMQ, I remember seeing, what was it, last year, that you needed to, set up some GNU radio flow graphs and that type of stuff. Is that now like standalone? You can just run an individual client and receive data, or is the process a little different?
The process is very similar. The ZMQ socket it's called a source in GNU radio flow graphs. It's the same as if you were using a source for a real radio. That part of the flow graph changes. It's one block, and then the rest of the flow graph is exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether it's a real piece of hardware or whether it's the ZMQ socket. So the process between the virtual world and the real world is very, very similar. Again, the only caveat is you can't retune the radio because it's not your radio.
Right.
And that is available. We give out those code snippets to allow people to just dump the data and then to build whatever they want on it. We've also added some examples, for instance, on how to dump it to a file. We didn't want to just distribute files because then it's a BitTorrent contest, right? Yeah. You download a bunch of files and you open them in the tool, and it just doesn't have that real feeling. But we do give those examples because some people are on bad connections or whatever. The goal, however, is to move all of this into the AWS environment so that you're not really streaming packets to your house. You're streaming packets from one location in a virtual environment to another, and it doesn't depend on your bandwidth at all to negate that packet loss on bad connections.
Yeah, I mean, our goal was always to teach, and we always were angry that we couldn't get the reach we really wanted. So by being able to send this out to the masses, and we typically leave this up throughout the year, at least parts of it throughout the year, and people are on our Discord and they're like, hey, can you run something? I want to do some testing. We now have the ability to have people do all the things that we do at conferences, all the things we teach at conferences, all the talks we give, and actually sit in their basements and do it, or sit in their offices and do it, or sit on their tablet in their car and do it. It's just, it brings it out to the masses. And one of our missions has always been to teach. RF Hacker Sanctuary, the actual mission of the 501c3 is to teach and to learn, to teach, learn, and pass on. So
the main thing that motivates us is we love doing this, and we'd like to find other people who love doing this and share what we love with them. And so the thing that really just thrilled me about last year, honestly, is we had a bunch of people in our Discord. It was like, I've never even dreamed that I'd be able to go to DEF CON, and now I'm playing in a DEF CON Capture the Flag. I'm so excited. It's like, me too, buddy. Me too. You get to sit in your house in whatever country, and you get to do this, and you're excited, and I'm excited, and we're all excited together. And that's what we do this for. We just love this technology, and we love messing with it. And to share that with others is our goal.
That's awesome.
And we are missing that one last piece that is running right now, which is super exciting to me as well. We're actually doing another worldwide war drive. So yes, working with Wiggle, that is happening again. Last year, from Monday to Sunday, we were over 1.1 million new APs found worldwide. We're shooting for a lot more than that, because by Tuesday, we started Monday night at midnight PDT. And by Tuesday afternoon, I think there were about 500,000 APs already found. So that's running simultaneously with all this as well.
Rick and Zero, describe for our audience what war driving is and some of the history behind it, because we've not talked about that on the show in several years.
And the tie between the
2005
worldwide war driving that technically no longer exists. Oh.
Rick's looking for his coin collection. Give him a second.
So That is what you're talking about, I think, Larry?
You got it.
Yeah. So, DEF CON a million years ago, right after Shipley's talk, there was a push to have a worldwide war drive.
Wait, sorry, Rick, for our audience as well. Shipley, I mean, I know what you're referencing in Shipley's talk, but it's a pretty historic talk in Wi-Fi security history.
Yeah, pretty much.
The significance.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So used to talking to you guys, in person at the village. And we all, yeah. Sorry about that. Not everybody knows who he is. We actually brought him back to the village a couple years ago. That was an interesting thing. So anyway, so that all started, and since it happened, I mean, it's what really rocked my world when it came to wireless and seeing what was really out there. We wanted to honor that tradition. The problem was we tried it at ShmooCon 5 years ago or so, and we had people going through DC, similar to the way that they did it in Vegas. The way they did it in Vegas was there were a bunch of access points. You had to grab as many as you could. There were some hidden access points that people had to find, and there was a bunch of rules that, frankly, it's been 19 years and I don't remember all of them. But essentially, it was go out and capture as many packets and as many access points as you can, and put them into some sort of tool, whether it was NetStumbler or Kismet or Aerodump, and turn them in for points. Well, we tried that at DEF CON or at ShmooCon, like I said, 4 or 5 years ago, and what we realized was everything that we would have done to cheat, people did, and trying to track that was really hard to do. So we had everybody turn in their packets by, I believe it was like 10 o'clock on Sunday, and Heidi's briefing was the end of ShmooCon was somewhere around 3. And I think it was 2:49 before we were able to parse through it. Rick wrote a billion scripts to try and make things work. So we decided that we'd shelve that for a little while. Well, last year with the pandemic, we wanted to propagate this and we wanted to push it out again, and we really wanted to bring it back to life. So we got in touch with the guys at Wiggle, and they're like, hell yeah, we'd love to do that. For those that don't know, Wiggle.net is the pretty much central repository for war driving, going out and gathering packets. They've built themselves out to cellular, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. So that's super cool. We were really just interested in Wi-Fi because Bluetooth moves, and cell towers, there's weird FCC stuff that we don't want to totally publish. So we did the Wi-Fi piece, and they captured so many packets. It was absolutely amazing. There's people out there that have walked 67 kilometers this week already. There's people on skateboards. There's people at DEF CON that were in Salt Lake City that are, multiple zones trying to catch packets. The way that Wiggle designed it was they actually made everybody build out a quadrant. And within that quadrant, you had to capture as many access points as you could. But we wanted to make it a little bit more challenging. So within those access points, there were false foxes, or APs that had MAC addresses that people needed to find. It proved that they were actually in that quadrant. And
we don't give away the entire anti-cheating mechanism, Rick.
What?
Maybe don't give away the entire anti-cheating mechanism. Just a thought.
It's not all of it. There's more. Go ahead. You finish up then, smarty pants.
Yeah, so with the pandemic, we decided we wanted people to do this, and we didn't want to score it, and we couldn't even guess how we would make it fair. And we engaged with Wiggle, and they helped us come up with this really great idea of building these quadrants and trying to get the best coverage you possibly could inside of the area you select. A lot of people played last year, which was really exciting for us, but the scoring was crazy. One particular user really just ran away with it and did awesome. And the local celebrity of Grimace has been enduring through the year. And this year, a lot more people really played very tactically, trying to pick the best quadrant, because the way the scoring works is there's a certain number of points that Wiggle's seen, and they're in that quadrant already. Somebody's war driven that area before.
I was going to say, so there has to be a baseline, right?
Right.
So I have to find as many access points within that quadrant based on the baseline of what maybe thousands of people have found in the past.
Right, exactly. So Wiggle's been collecting this data for 20 years, and they've got a decent amount of stuff, and they take all of that and they say, okay, we think there's 10,000 access points in this quadrant. And then they pick some of the ones that are the highest quality and they use those as foxes. And basically you have to find those to make sure that you are actually driving through your area.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get scored on what percentage of the access points in the area you find. So if you find all of the access points, that's great. But what these people are doing is they're finding these quadrants that have some data, or like a few neighborhoods were just built there. And now there's thousands and thousands more access points. So the current leaders are at 180 times the initial number of access points.
Right.
So they found 180 times more access points than Wiggle knew about.
Again, back to your comment, it's really difficult to score.
It is really difficult to win. It's not difficult to score. There's 60 players with a score.
Score accurately.
It's our scoring.
Yeah, our ability to score is really, really difficult. So we've intentionally designed it this way. We've intentionally put in a bunch of anti-cheating mechanisms. There's a bunch of reports on the back end that go through the data as it's reported, so that there's the regular Wiggle import process. And then there's a post-processing script that they run just for us that does extra discrimination to make sure that all of the stuff is legitimate looking. And if it's not legitimate looking, we go over it together with a fine-tooth comb, making sure that nobody's cheating.
Because my goal would be to generate SSIDs and then discover them. And I'm sure that's probably one of the more common tactics.
That is exactly
driving around with a packet generator is exactly what we're stopping.
Right.
Yeah.
But I will say, and to their credit, and just giving them their due, Wiggle is all about 100% about privacy and not allowing people's information out there.
Yep.
So people that are actually playing in the game sign a secondary checkbox that says, your data is going to be tracked based on your username.
Yep.
Otherwise, and that was a big change for them, they don't track based on SSIDs based on username as a open system. They actually try to anonymize that on their end as much as possible. So they've made some concessions for the game.
When I saw this last year, I thought that was quite amazing in that. So not only can you get points for the CTF, it helps keep their data fresh. Like, because on this one day, this couple of days, everybody's getting new data. Because I can remember for a long time with Wiggle data, like we'd go back to go and look stuff up there, and like, hey, there's an access point, and it's from like 2001, and all of a sudden that data started going away. Like some of that data started falling off, which is good, at least from being displayed to us, I'm sure. So getting
some
new
of those
data there is
access
amazing.
points you bought in 2001 only had so much life in them before they just melted and stopped working, basically.
And the landscape has changed in 20 years.
Big time. It's so what were the reasons back then you would war drive, and why would you want to war drive today, other than for just the lols?
Oh God, back then was war driving to find internet. That was like the main reason. I mean, war. I know that was a backhanded softball, but war chalking, where you would actually draw on the ground or near a building what type of Wi-Fi they had, what their encryption was, how strong their signal was, how much bandwidth they had.
Like the
internet out,
like the
out
hobo
in the wild.
markings. Yeah, like the old school hobo markings.
Yeah.
Yep. So when you came off the train tracks, you knew that there was a friendly lady that would let you sleep in the shed and would give you some oatmeal for breakfast type of thing.
Yeah, you have chalk stains on your fingers still, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was done to try and find Wi-Fi. Back then, as a young hacker, trying to find networks that we were able to look at or to track or to figure out or to break, or when CalPatty would come out and we'd have our 45 CDs that would have all the data on them. It was what was cool back then, and a lot of that's changed now. We're driving now is more for like reconnaissance and trying to figure out what's in an area or density or population, or how much is how many WPA3 access points can you find. I know at one point on Wiggle, I was the leader in WPA3 access points with 3, which were at my house.
Damn it, I'm going to be behind you with 1 at my house.
I think Zero's got us all now, but he's got his 65 radio rigs now.
True.
72, but who's counting?
There we go. Sorry.
There was always a great debate back in the day too, like how many access points were open, how many were WEP encrypted, and then how many were WPA. Is it really like the landscape just kind of changed? I would imagine you don't find too much WEP. You probably still find some open access points.
You'd be surprised.
With captures and stuff.
A surprising amount of WEP still. I don't think I've gone out on an engagement where we haven't seen it somewhere in the last year or two. The handheld scanners, the symbol scanners, and some of the POS systems don't have a WPA supplicant in them, and they're too expensive for a lot of groups to change. So in industrial parks and places like that, I'm still seeing a decent enough amount of WEP to make it still viable.
Medical equipment too.
Yep. Yeah, I wanted to say the irony is that I went to define my grid square for wireless CTF this morning, and my home area doesn't have enough access points, so it wouldn't let me use my home area as a grid square. Thanks, guys, because there's a ton of new stuff there. And then,
if you had been wiggling there to start with, then there would be more things, and you could use that grid square.
But why would I? Yeah. So I wiggled the grid square on my way to the studio tonight. So I actually wardrobe on the way to the studio, and I seem to remember looking on the phone in the Wiggle app because I was lazy. And I want to say that Wiggle had documented like 35 million web networks still in their database.
Yeah.
That is the approximate number. It's 4.55% of what they've seen. The Wiggle stats page is great. They've got a public stats page. And if you look at the Wi-Fi networks over time section, you can see when our contest was last year.
Right.
It is the largest spike on the chart. And we're really hoping to top that this year.
I know Larry and I have always, talked about it as new wireless, technologies. I mean, at one point, Bluetooth was a newer wireless technology, right? And as newer ones come about, like, could you ward drive for those? Have you thought about expanding it to? I think Bluetooth listening is still really super interesting. Yep. I know Zero, you've done some of that.
I see one that would sort of the up and comer that might be kind of interesting to add for another one. One LoRa, like, could we do some sniffing on LoRa? And
what is LoRa?
It's long range radio technology, low speed, and Thread.
Yeah, definitely something people are looking for. We've talked a lot about Wiggle, and one of the great things about Wiggle is their sweet little Android app that does Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and cell towers because it's a cell phone.
Yep.
However, the majority of players are playing with Kismet, and Kismet does a whole bunch of stuff more than that. So you can do a few different kinds of software-defined radios, mostly based on RTL SDR. You can do ward driving for RTL 433 stuff, which is like all your car clickers and your TPMS sensors and the little button that turns your outlet on and off for your Christmas tree lights.
And does Mike's still actively maintaining Kismet? He is still the person behind it?
Dragorn is still the one who leads it.
Dude, he's done like an amazing job.
New core.
Yeah, like I remember when I first started converting my laptop and other systems to Linux, I'm like, well, this is great. Now I don't need a VM for any of this crap. And I had to do some Wi-Fi troubleshooting. And like he had packages already up with a repo for 2004. I'm like, this is awesome. And he had a whole new. I hadn't used Kismet in some time. He has a whole web interface now and stuff. Like it's really awesome.
Yeah, the amount of interfaces that it'll take. We did the last year that we were physically at DEF CON. We actually got interviewed on the Ferris wheel with our Kismet mobile rig. 17 sources going into Kismet. It may or may not have been handcuffed to me on the Ferris wheel for shits and grins, but that's it was an interesting night. But we were able to get temperature sensors. We were able to pick up airplanes, a ton of Wi-Fi, a ton of Bluetooth. What else was mouse and keyboards that were heavily vulnerable up on the top of the Ferris wheel in Vegas.
Now, for the input, what is the keyboard using input into Kismet for that? What hardware? RTL SDR?
Bluetooth? Some of them.
No, those are mouse jack dongles.
Yeah.
They're a little NRF chip.
Okay.
The same ones used by a mouse jack and Logitech.
Okay, I didn't know Kismet would take that input.
Totally does. He's really like, if it's easy to capture packets with, Kismet supports it right now. There's maybe 5 or 6 different Bluetooth low energy chips that it supports. It supports several different Zigbee devices. It supports RTL SDR for anything that reasonably and rationally formats the data. He's rewritten his own ADSB and one that is for power sensors. He also does power meters. Yeah, you can track airplanes in Kismet. You can see if your neighbor's got the fridge turned on or whatever. I mean, it's got an amazing amount of things that just plug right into it. And there's new things being developed every day, which is awesome. There's some folks working on building Crocodile Hunter in as a source. However, that's a little bit more challenging.
What is Crocodile Hunter?
So Crocodile Hunter is the EFF's 5G, 4G kind of look for evil cell towers device. So it's
catcher.
Yeah, it's an MZ catcher.
Yep. Okay.
It's based on, I believe, Blade RF and some other different software-defined radios, and it's an MZ catcher, and it's a really big involved piece of software because LTE is a pretty big involved piece of software itself. So that's a little bit more difficult. But things like
is that legal to run in the U.S.? I know some of the cell frequencies were protected. Is that?
I would like to refer you to the EFF.
Yeah.
EFF released that software, and
they're lawyers. They've got lawyers there. So yeah.
They do.
I think what Zero's trying to say is he's not a lawyer, nor did he play one on TV last night, and it's getting late, and he needs yogurt.
It's a smart answer.
Oh,
yogurt o'clock is actually 9, so we've got a few hours still.
All right.
Just to dinner.
Good. But so from the wireless CTF perspective, I know you guys are doing a ton of stuff. There's all sorts of SDR, demodulate, decode. There's a bunch of Wi-Fi stuff. Thoughts about adding some of these new technologies and how you could potentially even virtualize some of those to make them at home, like LoRa and Thread.
So I'll start off with, we are a volunteer organization that loses other people's money for fun. Mm-hmm. And if you'd like to join us in losing other people's money, we are happy to help you. We buy hardware and we build cool challenges based on whatever skill set we have available to us, right? So I would love to add more stuff. We need people with those skill sets. So for example, LoRa is something I've never personally played with. Could we virtualize it? Sure.
Wait, sorry, Zero, what do people use LoRa for? What are the applications of that? You said it was long range.
LoRa's a long range, low power protocol, and it's mostly used for like small sensors or small message passing interfaces.
Yep.
To just kind of send stuff.
Yep. Typically like MQTT. It's growing in popularity for some IoT type and IIoT stuff.
Oh, I see. Like a serial Modbus kind of protocol, but in
you think old days of 900 megahertz stuff.
Yeah. So the problem is like everything that uses LoRa's a base technology, but there's a bunch of really tweaky parameters. Like they're not all on the same frequency. Mm. They're not all on the same XYZ modulation. Like they can change a bunch of that stuff. So if there's a really popular thing that uses LoRa, we can easily, add something that picks that up. But that's just not something I've spent a lot of time with. So that's not something I can do. But what I can do is take somebody that has that expertise and help them to build a challenge, help them to build something virtual. The other thing is some of this stuff just doesn't easily lend itself to virtual, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of our favorite challenges was the dog shock collar challenge, and it's just not the same virtual. So what we would do is have a shootout. We would have a shock collar from Home Depot or whatever.
Oh, so it's like a collar, and then the remote is RF.
Yes,
and it sends the shock.
A dog shock collar, a training collar, and we'd have 2 people put them on, and then they would go back to their laptops and they would try to shock the other person before they got shocked.
Oh,
that's super fun.
It is,
but it's not fun virtual. Some things just don't lend themselves.
Super not fun if you're the person getting shocked. I bet though.
Well, the fun part about it was a one-way transmission, and you didn't know if you were sending it to you or you were sending it to the other collar.
So you could be shocking yourself.
And there were people that were shocking themselves quite a bit. It was awesome to watch.
It's an interesting take on Battleship.
Yeah, right?
You should my Battleship.
Incorporate that into Battleship. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, the game ended when somebody wrote a full decoder and encoder, and they actually knew what they were sending. Because what we would do beforehand is we'd press a random button, we'd let people capture it. We'd press another random button, let people capture it. And it's like, replay whichever one you want. Whoever gets shocked first loses. And they would just replay everything, and they'd shock themselves, and they'd shock the other player, and everyone would laugh, and it was fun. And somebody built a full decoder and encoder, and it's like, oh no, what was the limit on the remote? 100? No. The protocol goes up to 255. Let's see if this thing works.
And it does, doesn't it?
Oh, it
does.
does.
Battery died first shock.
Oh yeah.
So depending on the signal it receives, that determines the strength of the shock. It's not a physical switch, right?
No.
Correct. It is dependent on the signal, and the remotes for like home use go from 0 to 100, and the remotes for military use go up to 255. And the protocol the remote's different. That's it. The shock collar's the same.
Yep. The remote sends a different value in this field.
Yep.
Done.
Exactly.
Oh,
Ouch.
Yep.
There's a question from the chat. What about WeSun? I don't know what that is.
I don't either.
WISUN. Anyone?
Sounds like I got to pee, or my boy needs to go pee. WeSun. I don't know.
Yeah, but we've been pretty open on our Discord channel. I mean, if you have the ability to create a challenge, and within a few parameters that we can score, we'll take submissions, and we'll absolutely change, alter, modify it. You can't play that, and you're pretty much banned from that challenge. But we're taking submissions for challenges across the board. So if you have one for Laura, send it to us, and we'll get it in place as long as it meets our parameters.
Nice.
Yeah, I would like to say our Discord is probably the friendliest place on the internet I've ever been. People are there because they just love doing this stuff. And so whether it's somebody who's got tons of expertise or whether it's somebody that has no idea what they're doing, but they think this stuff is interesting, it's just super nurturing environment because people they like this and they want to share it with others. There's none of that old IRC stuff.
Yeah, and that I was going to say back earlier that was very much like RF Hacker Sanctuary. The mission is to give back, just like the old school hackers that wanted to share their information with folks to help everybody be better.
To be fair, there was ones that did and some that didn't.
It's true. Admittedly,
and I think we need to. I think promoting and encouraging the ones that do right is important, right? Because I think it's important to share knowledge.
Yep.
Speaking of that, my next.
But real quick, and you say that the Discord channel is incredibly friendly. I would tend to agree, except for the Pen2 support channel. Like the guy that runs that, he's a dick.
Oh God, such a dick.
Works on mine.
Yeah. That's just the automated bot. That's zero chaos.
That's zero.
Yeah, it works on my machine.
I have automated that response.
Yeah.
It works on my machine. Use Pen2.
Lee has a question.
So I'm thinking, with all the success it had, you've got to have people pounding down the door to come, have you help them at their event or provide an option event. What's that look like?
That looks like a constant stream of people sending us emails or talking to us on Discord saying, "Hey, would you like to, do a capture the flag at our conference?" And for hacker conferences, the answer is yes, as often as we can. We've probably done more CTFs this year than we have any previous year because we've retooled everything and we can get a much faster turnaround. We can play a game every weekend. And when there isn't a game to be played, I normally just turn it back on and let people play it, without a conference at all, just so that they've got the experience into play and I've got the test. They report bugs or complain that things are broken and then I get to fix them. So we really try to do it as much as possible. The one thing we do turn down is we don't do paid gigs. Like we're not going to do your corporate event. We're not going to do those kinds of things. But for hacker conferences, for free conferences especially, we love to do, B-sides events and those kinds of things.
Yeah. So how do you pay your cloud bill? Right? Because you guys must have to pay to host these in the cloud, correct?
Yeah, our
cheap.
costs are non-zero. Yeah, we've got great sponsors for years.
Oh, okay. So you do have someone that helping you foot the bill, because I was going to say you're spinning up stuff in the cloud that obviously costs money most of the time.
Well, it was actually, it's funny, it was more expensive before the cloud, or differently expensive.
Yep.
We'd walk into a conference with, like Rick said, like 6 Pelican cases, 27 miles of Cat5, and 35, 40 access points. He started automating this about 6 years ago to a point where it was 5 or 6 access points. And now we have the ability to run live and virtual exactly the same. So if you're sitting at DEF CON next year and we're sitting at the table at the RF Village, the game that people are playing on the floor is going to be the same game that somebody's playing in Europe.
Nice.
That's awesome.
So when
the sponsors do make that.
The sponsors how much skin do they have in the game? I mean, are they having to roll up their sleeves, or are you taking it all on for them?
Yeah, as I said before, we're really happy for anybody who wants to help us. We do have a fairly small team, and it does affect our ability to do new things because the team is the team, and they've got the skills that they've got, and more people are always welcome. The sponsors, majority sponsor us with money. We do have some sponsors that sponsor us with hardware that we give away to winners of the game and those kinds of things. Especially at conferences, people love to walk away with a new SDR, a new Wi-Fi card or whatever, and that's great. We have a few sponsors that have helped us through specific technical difficulties. For example, we wanted to do some 802.11ac stuff and we wanted to do some 802.11ax stuff, and we engaged with our sponsor Aruba to help us with that. But they don't control the game. None of the sponsors get to control the game. We control the game. We choose what we do. It's the best hacker idea of how sponsorship works. You give us money and we decide what to do with it.
Yeah.
How big is your team?
We purposefully won't take a sponsor that wants to be too involved.
Right.
We do a lot of cool things for our sponsors. We throw up waterfalls of their images up on the screens, and we do some really cool stuff to promote them as much as we can. Aruba, like Rick said, I mean, we've got their stuff on our tables, using it pretty regularly, but for the most part, we ask them to support us, and we thank them really hardcore and a happy handshake. But beyond that, we're using their stuff and using their money to make this better for people.
Now, how big is your team?
So the total team is about 10 people. The total people who are hard engaged is probably closer to 5. Again, like some people do their part, and they just do their part, and they reliably do their part, and I love those people forever.
Yeah.
Because there's too many things, and you need somebody to do it. So, we've got a team member, Corey, who takes care of the majority of the SDR stuff. And I say, hey, I'd like it to be architected this way. And he says, you got it. And then he builds it, and then I don't have to worry about it. Our team member, Dan, does all of the POXAG stuff. And every time there's a conference, I say, please roll the keys. And he rolls the keys, and he gives me what I need, and we run the game. More people like that are great. You don't have to do everything, right? Nobody wants to be the web developer for the team. And so I do. Yeah. I don't want to, but it gets done. Somebody has to maintain the scoreboard code. Somebody has to maintain the stuff that nobody wants to deal with. And that's a core team member job. But volunteers do what they want to. And people that want to donate a challenge to us that's actually usable, the answer is, come be our friend. And I know a lot of villages do like a call for volunteers and things like that. And we found that the best way to get involved is just join our community, jump into Discord, talk to people. When I say something silly like, hey, I'm setting up the game. If anybody wants to help me test, that'd be great. And you start testing, you get noticed real quick. I mean, there's a few people in our Discord that have no technical association with us whatsoever, other than they like wireless stuff like we do. And I'll post, a Docker container that I'm using for the contest. And they'll say, oh, yeah, you messed this up right here. And they'll send me a pull request that installs the needed package that I missed or whatever. And it's like, that's spectacular. Like, this is open source. We've actually released almost 100% of our game. And in the next couple of weeks, it'll probably be 100%. One of the bits is really, really dirty, and I'm still cleaning it up. But we're actually releasing this. You can play this on your own. You can set this whole thing up. There's a series of scripts that just runs everything for you. And, we love people to be involved. So we try to make it as open and available as possible.
At the risk of running over on time, but I really want the answer, or at least some answers to this question, because I know it can go on for a while. If someone wants to get started in playing the CTF, in analyzing wireless frequencies, radio frequencies, what kind of hardware and software should they start playing around with?
So, real fast, quick answer we actually, unlike Pen 2, which is getting better, by the way, have some pretty decent documentation, and we keep it as updated as we can. Joining the scoreboard creates a user account, and you have a button on there that says provision my VMs. You create those VMs, and it actually builds out your environment for you. So from a output of initial learning for this, 0. If you own a computer, have a tablet, even, if your eyes are still good and you're not wearing glasses yet, your phone, you can start to play this game. Mm-hmm. The Aerodump Wiki, the Gen 2 Wiki, the Arch Wiki, all these places that have information on how the radios work and how to use IW, how to use ifconfig, how to use, the different, minor tools that you need. You can get started with this pretty easily. Great Scott Gadgets, Mike Osman's talk is 100 hours on how does SDR work is an amazing place to start. If you're doing pure hardware, an RTL SDR is about $20. Mm-hmm. A Wi-Fi radio external, ACM, for example, is about $45. And a laptop is, if you have one that's old, it's, free, or you buy something cheap. Open source software is free. So we're at about $70 right there for really getting started in listening to these signals. When you want to start injecting, the SDRs get a little bit more expensive, but it doesn't take much to get started, and the built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in a lot of these newer laptops is phenomenal. So low bar to entry.
Unlike back in the day.
Yep.
That's awesome. More questions?
I think we're all ready to start clicking.
They want to play.
That's exactly what we wanted. It's exactly what we want. We want a low barrier to entry. We finally found a way you can hack Wi-Fi from a Mac. Now you just have to use your browser.
But I want to hack somebody else's Wi-Fi from a Mac, Rick.
It's my Wi-Fi. Doesn't that count?
I guess.
Can you do it with Can you do it with VMs? I know that there was always the debate if it would actually recognize the hardware or the virtualization layer would get in the way.
Can you
talk about Macs or just VMs in general?
Both.
So Macs still have to recognize the radio to pass it through the hardware abstraction layer to get it into the VM.
So USB.
Docker seems to be working very well, though.
Interesting.
Yeah, but not on a Mac. You have to be on Linux to do that.
Yeah, I gotcha.
The answer is it works 80% of the time. And if it doesn't work, it will probably be so confusing you won't know. And that's really the big problem, especially with SDR. So with Wi-Fi,
I think you just described open source in general, basically.
But the problem is a lot of stuff you can tell if it's working or not. So if you pass your Wi-Fi card to the VM and it shows up, it's working, right? You assume everything's good, everything's cool, and 20% of the time it won't pass to the VM. And a small percentage of the time, it'll be stuck in like some weird state, and that's confusing. But that's a very small percentage of the time. With software-defined radio, it's different because the amount of bandwidth it needs and the amount of latency that it requires. Doing that VM abstraction layer and getting passed all the way in, sometimes it's just broken enough that nothing works. And not being an expert, it's super hard to diagnose that.
Yeah.
So this is why Pen2 exists. This is why it's a live bootable Linux system. There's a bunch of competitors at Pen2. If you don't want to use a Gen 2 based system, don't do it. You'll come back to me later when you learn. It's fine. But there's Kali.
We should point out for the audience that you are the creator and one of the main maintainers of Pen2.
Yes, I am the maintainer. I did not initially start the project, but I joined soon after. And it is the longest running penetration testing Linux distribution. It started before Backtrack started, and it is still around after Backtrack is gone.
And it's basically a Gen 2, right? A Gen 2 based penetration testing Linux distro.
It is a Gen 2 based penetration testing distro. And what I tell people about that is if you're running a live CD, it only matters that the tools work. It doesn't matter what the base is so much.
Yeah.
If everything on there works the way you want it to and you're running live, great. So for a CTF environment, I want to run this at a con environment, there's no additional cost. This isn't extra effort to run Gen 2. If you like it and you install it, you're going to learn Gen 2 and there's a learning curve there and you're not going to love that. But if you've already gotten to, like the tools and the way things work, you use it. And if you don't want to, then don't.
But I think that's good. I mean, that's general advice in Linux that I give most people, regardless if we're talking about Pen2 or whatever. Like you have, there's only so many hours in the day, and you got to pick what interests you. Like sometimes you have weird problems on Linux. Like, do I want to just go get a different piece of hardware and maybe troubleshoot something different and maybe not have the problem, or am I like really interested in how this particular USB audio device works, and I want to go pick it apart, right? And understand pulse audio and ALSA, which I don't recommend, by the way.
I've been a Gen 2 developer for 10 years, working on Pen 2 for the same amount of time. And my advice to anybody picking a Linux distro is use the one that you have to ask the least stupid questions about.
Yeah.
You know, if you're most comfortable in Ubuntu, use Ubuntu. And if you find that you're spending more of your time asking, like, I can't get this installed, why doesn't this work? Maybe it's time to look into something else. Something that works better for what your needs are, something that works for what you're trying to do.
It's like the devil you know versus the devil you don't know too.
Totally.
That's because new people come in the field, ask me like, oh, I want to learn all these Linux distributions. I'm like, look, try them all, but like eventually like pick one so that like you know what you're getting into, and you know the commands and where the bodies are buried for the most part, so that you can troubleshoot more easily rather than going, well, I want to be an expert in 3 or 4, and then it's, dude, all the distros are just different. Like that's why it never has been the year of the Linux desktop, in my opinion, is because all the distros treat everything so differently.
And Red Hat is never the answer.
What I will do is, without patting Rick on the back with him listening, he does have one of the only distros that you can plug just about any radio into and it will work, because he does that much research on them. And luckily, I've got a group of people that we test with 5-6 times a year that send him 500 or 600 bug reports a year on different radios that have problems or issues or whatever, and they're fixed within hours. So it's pretty cool from that perspective. He is a little snarky online, but when it comes to an actual problem, it gets fixed real fast.
So he's snarky in person too. What are you talking about?
and so what you're saying is that Zero doesn't have a life.
Correct.
Okay.
And we give it right back to him.
Yep. Just like those lemons.
I think we should play 5 questions with both Ricks.
Yeah.
You guys ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Sure.
Been a few years since I've had to play this game. Sure.
Yeah, the questions have changed slightly. How we play the game hasn't. So I'm gonna pick someone at random. Zero, you're gonna go first. I'm gonna ask you the question, and then Rick, I'm gonna ask you the question, and then Rick, you're gonna get the second question, and you'll figure it out. You're both really smart people. So Zero, 3 words to describe yourself.
Cantankerous, tired, and honestly, loser. I lost the game this year. I'm very sad.
Rick, 3 words to describe yourself.
Dad, tired, and introvertedly extroverted.
Rick, if you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Oh, an axe, absolutely.
Zero.
Oh, you just said that to mess with Woody.
Absolutely.
Zero, what's your weapon of choice if you were a serial killer?
Oh, my hands.
Zero, if you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Adventures in Never Leaving the House.
Rick, if you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
1333 1337 reasons to do things wrong.
Rick, what's your favorite hacker movie?
Which Rick?
Rick M. Sorry.
Sneakers.
Zero. Favorite
Damn,
hacker
can I
movie?
take his?
Yep.
You can, yes.
Totally Sneakers.
Oh, man. Jeff isn't here to razz me, but Jeff and I have like a little thing anyway.
I know you have a little thing.
I think, yes. It's a dongle. So Zero, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Fictional or otherwise.
Oh, God. Pass.
And if Mega Man doesn't enter into it, I'd be disappointed.
Oh, man, that's a great idea. Yeah, Dr. Light and I guess it would be weird, but can it be Dr. Light and Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it's 2021. I think that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. We said two parents. We didn't specify,
Yeah.
they could be of any gender, of any fiction, nonfiction. It's Rick M. Two celebrities.
Cal Ripken and Princess Leia.
There you go.
Oh.
Rick and
Wow.
Rick, thank you so much for appearing on this edition of Paul Security Weekly.
Thanks for having us.
Guys.
It's great.
Great.
Stay tuned. Coming up next, Scott and Yuriy from Eclypsium. Stick around. keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing, known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through the 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista Hotel. We're excited to announce our first round of speakers that will include David Kennedy, Alyssa Miller, O'Shea Bowens, Marina Chiavata, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Kevin Johnson, and Justin Kohler. You can learn more and register by visiting securityweekly.com/unlocked. And we've got a lot of fun things in store, getting ready to make an announcement. So actually, although like last week, I have stuff to share internally. Soon we'll be sharing those with the public as well, and I'm super, super excited. This segment is sponsored by Eclypsium. You can visit securityweekly.com/Eclypsium. Protect all your firmwares. Joining us from Eclypsium, of course, is Scott Scheferman, no stranger to the show. Scott is the principal security strategist there. Yuriy was supposed to join us, but could not make it because, Black Hat's it's a busy time. If you're out there, you should take the time to meet with people and do all the stuff. So Scott's here to talk about how the stakes are raised when protecting the foundation of computing. Scott, welcome back to Paul's Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks, man. Always good to be here. It's you can tell it's like super busy here in Las Vegas.
You found a quiet. So tell us about Black Hat, Scott. You're out at Black Hat, which is pretty awesome. Tell us about
it. Yeah. Black Hat is a lot of people are it's very sparse. It's almost like DEF CON felt 15, 20 years ago. And which is great is, you see a face, you know who they are, even with the mask on, you can see somebody and you can just see them. And it's not like a sea of people you don't know. The vendor area was very sparse and minimal. In fact, there weren't even carpets on half the vendor area. So it's just kind of ragtag, low key kind of vibe, lots of space to move around, very comfortable, not super exhausting like it normally is. Let's see, the talks, I heard everything's been good. So it's got the hybrid thing going on. So people are finding each other via hybrid or in person like we normally do.
Yeah, it's really cool. And now, are you guys presenting at Black Hat or just at DEF CON?
At DEF CON. Yep. Okay.
Tell us about the talk you're giving at DEF CON. I think you kind of teased it last time.
Yeah, it's a super exciting talk. In fact, it's probably one of the talks that's getting the most talked about before the talk. It's on Saturday, and Jesse and Mickey will be giving the talk. Of course, they're the researchers that discovered BIOS disconnect, did the analysis, and did some other cool things that you will have to wait and see on Saturday. I think it's 10 a.m. Track 1 on Saturday. BIOS disconnect is the name of it if you're trying to remember these things, but track 1 on Saturday. And it's phenomenal research, but it drives to that same point that you said. It's the foundation of computing itself is literally just like getting the rug wiped out from underneath it. And what's left is all this super insecure code, these super old style bugs, these super easy buffer overflows, these vulnerabilities in TLS protocol that shouldn't be there 20 years on, et cetera. So it's one of those things where you say, wow, why do we still have these same problems, from major OEMs, from critical software at the firmware level in the year 2021? How are we still doing this wrong? So
now do you I guess from the standpoint of most organizations, this is kind of a very, very low level when a lot of them aren't getting the fundamentals right. But do you see this as a very high risk to a lot of orgs right now? Things like ransomware, maybe TrickPot might be starting to use these kind of exploitations at the firmware level?
Yeah, that's kind of the question of the hour. Like, okay, you found a cool exploit, but is it something viable in the wild? Are attackers going to leverage? Like, which attackers would be likely to do that? What would the kill chain be? The initial vector? All these things go through your mind right away, right? For this, yeah, it's low level. If you're a Dell customer, this is primarily a Dell vulnerability in BIOS Connect, their feature at the firmware level. And if you're a Dell shop, then absolutely need to be worrying about this. We've had people coming up this whole conference, like the last 2 or 3 days, just saying, I'm a Dell shop. I need to talk to you guys, right? Because they want to understand the same question you just asked. So if you don't know about the vulnerability, it's, BIOS, Dell has this update feature called BIOS Connect, and it's meant to be able to restore the operating system or actually flash the BIOS itself if you need to do an update or firmware update, and you can't do it via other means. So BIOS Connect would be for like a user at home, for example. I bricked my OS or something. I need to fix it. Hit F12 when you start up, and it takes you through the normal BIOS Connect update process. The problem is that's fetching a binary from Dell's support site, on the internet. And so you have this most critical piece of BIOS firmware that's going over the internet and finding its way into your laptop at the firmware level, not ring zero, but lower than. And all of a sudden you have this interesting dynamic where if you can manipulate that or attack that system, you have a major vulnerability in a high impact one at that. So it requires an attacker to be in the middle, if that makes sense. So you can make a call to BIOS support, whatever it is, support.dell.com, and you intercept that and you serve up a different URL and you get a different binary. That the problem is the BIOS Connect feature will process that, run it, and execute it at the firmware level, right? So you have this situation where you have privileged code where you can start doing all sorts of crazy things. Yes, there are lots of paths to exploitation afterwards. In fact, that's one of the main reasons people are excited to go to the talk, is because this talk is going to be way more than just the research. You're going to get a live demo. It's going to be done on a secure core PC. It's going to bypass, things like secure boot, and BitLocker is not going to be able to have anything to say about it. In fact, there's nothing you can say about it. If you're an attacker and you're on that network and you're in the middle, you can totally abuse this. And being in the middle can be old school, like, ARP poisoning, Ettercap kind of style. Any attacker could do that these days on these massive flat networks. It can also be on these edge devices, like all the Soho routers at home, your VPN appliances that are getting rooted via remote code execution vulnerabilities left and right. And then there might even be ways to do this as well over DNS hijacking at the BGP poisoning level, where you can actually have a malicious binary being served on the internet that you own as an attacker as well. And so this is kind of the new world we're living in. And the talk's going to go over, like, how do you go from, okay, cool exploit or cool vulnerability to now let's see what we can really do. You know what I mean? So a lot of people are really looking forward to it. I know I am. I'll be there, front and center.
This is going to be an amazing talk. I've been sitting on my seat waiting for this one for a little while. Do you see some of the ransomware? Do you think this is our next evolution of how ransoms happen, rather than double extort, where you're ransoming and then leaking if you don't pay? Do you see this as being, hey, you better pay us, or your hypervisor servers are now going to be a big worthless piece of brick, and someone's going to have to come fix firmware? Do you see a big evolution kind of down that path from a ransomware standpoint?
I can tell in the look in your eyes that this is partially a trick question, but I'm going to go with it, because here's the thing. Like, the more you do incident response and you deal with these actors, the more you realize that they've latched onto the idea that at the end of the day, this is just extortion. It's just leverage. So whatever's going to give them the most leverage in the smallest amount of time to force you to a decision is the way they're going to go, and they have been going. That's why, like, you see double extortion, not just double, but triple extortion now, because you have the supply chain, your Micron, and now you're asking Apple for $50 million, or you're asking Sony for money, for example, right? Like, there's lots of different ways they're finding to gain additional leverage in the same small period of time for which the negotiation or the leverage happens, the extortion happens. So when it comes to firmware, there's two angles there. The road divides into two. One, I can brick your device at the motherboard level, and even if you have your backups and your keys were stored offline and you know how to restore from backup, even if you have a stack of hard drives ready to go, none of that helps you. And if you have a critical device that's down, a medical device, a critical infrastructure device, or an entire data center that's where the malware drops at the same time, and you brick that, you have it's an indefinite downtime. It's not like our restore time was going to be this week. It's going to be longer than that. So if you take like a destructive campaign like NotPetya or WannaCry, but like NotPetya went after the MBR. Why? Because it's more destructive, and that had destruction as its goal. Well, imagine this NotPetya rooting around like it did, and then bricking devices at the motherboard level instead of the hard drive level, right? It's not just incrementally worse; it's exponentially worse from impact. The other side of the road is persistence, and the ransomware groups these days know all about persistence, because that's what gives them the ability to either resell the same access to a third party later, or to reappear later and re-ransom the entire environment. And the access as a service brokers on the internet, on the dark web, they're the ones that are actually making the majority of the money. It's not the ransomware negotiators. So there's a high value placed to just the persistence mechanism, the ability to always be able to get into any organization for which you're at the firmware level. And
that's where I really identify with it. I think there are groups out there that are looking at the destructive aspect. The conspiracy theorist in me says that they're trying to cover their tracks, and they might use that to maybe cover their tracks. I think the groups that are highly and maybe purely profit motivated, if it were me with my evil hat on, I would ransomware them once, wait some time. Now I'm in the BIOS. Like at any point in the future, I can just read like, hey, you paid once. How about you pay me again? Which is awful to think about. But they literally own the computer within the computer, right? And this is what we're talking about. The computer in the computer.
Where does nation state fit into that scenario, Paul?
I think more on the destructive is where I would see nation states. Although I truly believe, so let's go with my conspiracy theories, right? My tinfoil hat theories, that you're going to be selective about it and perhaps balance your portfolio, that you want to have the capabilities to cause disruption to your adversaries, but you also want to fund your own operations, which could be some of the motivation behind nation state countries to the US to be able to fund their operations. They're doing the ransomware extortion style attacks because they're using that money to fund their operations.
As well as gain that persistence for long-term, long period campaigns and non-attributable areas of
that's
computer.
To me, that's the China theory, right? That we speculate and know from history that they'll play the long game on that. Russia, I think, to a certain extent as well. Why limit yourself to a one and done when you could play the long game?
So,
well, Paul, you mentioned something too, like the destructive aspect is interesting too, because I'm thinking back to all the IRs I did where once they know that you know that they're there and you're in the eradication phase, right? The containment phase and the eradication phase, they adapt, they change their TTPs, they go for creds again, they run all the cred gathering again one last time so they can have a hope to get back in. And it's a race against the clock. And one of the things we saw them do a lot in like all the way 2016, especially 2018 and after, is do a bunch of diversion at the end, like scorched earth policy, like blow out things, hurt things, DNS amplification attacks inside the network. Like it was back to like old school style. And I think if you think about like this, like what better scorched earth mechanism can you have than at the firmware level? Right? Because
I know, but in that begs a question, and I don't know if you're going to go through it. Your researchers will go through it in the talk on Saturday, but I know when Larry and I were writing the book on WT54G routers, right? I mean, we bricked some devices. A lot of those, Larry, like were hardware. Like we mashed the pins, right? I mean, basically to test that in prove that theory that if you could jumper those two pins on the flash chip, if you mashed them, you were going to have a really hard time. Like for a $40 device, probably just going to throw it out, buy a new one, right?
And nowadays that would be super simple for me to fix.
Yes,
but in the day,
more,
we've evolved.
Better tools and more experience, right? You can recover from that. But also, Larry and I tested all the different methods to recover the firmware in its entirety, right? And there were certain mechanisms back then. We had TFTP. In other such things, you could either JTAG and other devices that we've seen subsequently allow you to do that. My question, long way of getting to my question, is I've got a modern UEFI enabled, supported device, and that's the computer within the computer. If as an attacker I wipe that, can I put that back? I've fortunately, knock on wood, not been in that situation where I've toasted the UEFI system on my motherboard where I need to rebuild that from scratch. Is that is that hardware dependent? How does that work?
So I suppose anything is possible if you've written the right code and you know exactly what your intention and your path is, because you could make it such that the normal user, the victim, has a brick device for all intents and purposes. Yeah. But as long as the device has power, I think you could probably figure out how to come back alive again later. But I don't know. That's such an outlier case. I can't imagine walking through how that would be possible. It'd have to be intentional, to your point.
Yeah, how I've not had to rebuild. Like I'm assuming that UEFI sits on some kind of flash chip on the motherboard, and I could conceivably reconstruct that. But
you'd have to utilize the manufacturer's designated tools, which often require something like a JTAG or SPI access to the chip level.
If they make those available,
certain flash.
Do they make those available to you? I know, like with HP printers,
For the technicians, they do.
Yeah, a lot of times for technicians, right? It's not. When I buy an HP printer, for example, we talked about this attack on HP printers. Like, I could wipe the firmware on them. And then, as a consumer, even a enterprise consumer, can I rebuild that? I don't think they give the customers the ability to rebuild some of that.
So when we did tabletopping, when we did the TrickBot research, right, the Trick Boot research, I should say, and we were saying, what would happen if a data center actually has majority or a large percentage of their devices bricked at that level? The iterations we went through is either you can actually repair it physically on site with a proper technician and tools, JTAG, etc., which is an outlier case, but maybe for like a mission critical finance network that's, a critical segment, you have that person on board, right? But by and large, the net effect of the impact here is if I want to mitigate this risk, truly, this scenario risk, then the hot standby is really the only, you need a redundant motherboard, like that's already built, because you can't afford to, that's the motherboards. You have to put all the components on it. So you don't have time to do that anyway if it's that critical.
Those of us that have worked with that higher end rack mount server blade technology, it's not as easy as taking a motherboard out of a PC based system that you'd use for gaming. Like, it's a lot more involved to rip apart all that hardware, at least in my experience, right?
Honestly, there's dozens upon dozens of operating systems on those. Like, 40% of them are running probably Linux. There's probably at least 10 or 12 like full on like operating systems on those big server boards. And the point being that there's ways to jump around even across firmware. Like, so you flash your UEFI, you feel like you did that restoration, but I might be hiding over here somewhere else.
And the storage controller, right? Storage controller is a whole other computer in your computer, right? Because like basically everything's a computer today. Yep. I started reading
the processor in your network card.
I started reading Schneier's book, Click Here to Kill Everything. And I think one of the things that he articulated very well, that like we all knew, but I think the way he articulated it really brings it to light in this context, is that everything is a computer, right? Your dishwasher, your refrigerator, your refrigerator is a computer that keeps things cold, right? Your HVAC is something that might heat and cool, but these are computers.
Your password cracking ring is a computer that keeps things hot.
Yes. Right, but all these devices are basically computers that do that task. And I mean, even went so far as to in the car, like you think you're pushing the brakes, but it's really you're pushing the brakes and you're telling the computer to go control the calipers, right? And that was like, wow, that's really scary when we put it in. With again, something we all knew, on the show, and most of us listening knew that, but to put it in that lens is frightening.
Go ahead. Who's that?
I was going to say you add real-time operating systems on top of that, where the firmware and the operating system are all kind of runtime and very controlling. That becomes very, very terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
I had a conversation last night at, I think it was the Zero Fox party or something, and we were talking about and I don't remember who the researcher was, but somebody discovered a way to use in an AI model to actually embed malware in the model itself, so that the model itself is able to perform malicious functions normally attributed to a binary that is malware. And you're it's not just adversarial machine learning here. This is a kind of a step up from that. It's not even adversarial machine learning. You're not attacking the mass. You're actually using the model to run malware out of it to attack. So you talk about firmware. Cool. In that case, it's not just destruction or deletion or persistence. It's also could be data manipulation. Like you can literally affect the data running in the memory, right? And so that's really kind of, if we want to look further out, I think that's where you're going to see persistence actually play out as an actual data manipulation rather than just I have access kind of persistence.
You were hanging out with Will and Moohacks, weren't you?
I'm hanging out with a lot of people. Some of them are, I don't know if you can see my shirt, these guys. Woo woo! Woo woo! Yeah, there's I learn a lot from that group, as many people do, and it's just been really enlightening when we start talking about firmware. A lot of those conversations end up being what you might call like TLP red conversations, because they're not ransomware where you have to, or privacy event where you have to report, or your machine was bricked and you got bricked. Some of these things, when they're discovered, they're never reported because there's nothing driving the reporting for them, like for these types of instances. So it really depends on like the vertical people are in, but we have people that are hyper aware of this problem. We have others that are like, what's firmware? They're the same size organization, the same maturity. They have each of them has 25 people in their SecOps, but one organization's understanding of the firmware threat is like through the roof, and the other one's 100% ignorance to it, right?
Lee?
So I was remembering that a couple of years ago, it used to be popular. Could you, for $1 million, could you go for 90 days without using a computer? And nobody was remembering that the washer and dryer and the refrigerator were computers. Mm-hmm. But it also, I was flashing back a conversation that was trying to happen in a meeting and it couldn't. A friend of mine was really going on a tirade about how the BIOS has become so complicated and that we need to back down so that's not the case anymore. And I was thinking, is that the battle to play in this case? Is to simplify, or is there a better card to play to try and raise the bar?
Great question.
I feel like it's both, honestly. Quite frankly, I like the idea that there refuses. I like the idea that you had to kind of physically be there to do the damn thing. But at the same time, the irony, like with this BIOS disconnect discovery, is that's a feature designed to make this whole firmware management easier for organizations and end users. And same thing with HTTPS boot. Like these things are designed to facilitate to the least common denominator of user to be able to actually get their box up and running. And deal with even firmware updates that are vulnerability patching updates, right? To actually be better secure. And then the irony is you have this this TLS bug and you have these buffer overflows that are semi-trivial. And then to your point, what you can do once you're at the UFI level, like the complexity of that space with its own network stack, like we've talked about before, et cetera, makes it very interesting. That's why people are going to the talk. It's like the vulnerabilities are interesting, but once you've gotten there, it gets really interesting, right? So,
we've exposed.
Always bring up the right questions.
We've exposed the BIOS layer to not just the operating system, but the network as well. Whereas previously, you did require physical access to be able to boot on some physical medium in order to affect change. But if you think about if we had a data center, I mean, even the cloud, someone's got the data center, and we have to update the BIOS or the UFI on all of these systems, like you'd physically have to send someone there, and they would have to physically, I guess today that would play out, maybe not boot on a floppy, right? But today I've updated BIOS. You plug into a very specific USB port, and you push a button on the motherboard. And on some of them, those are even accessible through the back. I don't even have to take the case cover off. I can just put the USB in a certain port, and I can push the button. Although that does require...
That's why you have a network stack.
Yeah.
On your UFI now.
Yes, because I can only do that when, in this particular model, the system couldn't be booted. The board just has to have power, right? So I got to turn my power supply on, but I can't boot the system. And if it's in that state, I plug into a USB port and I push a button, and it reads a very specific file from my FAT16 formatted flash drive, right? And that does the BIOS update. Now on the newer board, this is just one option. You now have the option to do that over the network, full network stacks and UFI communication, bi-directional communication with the operating system, and that convenience has led us to this insecurity.
So you mentioned when you have to actually go service this and take care of this, so it just made me think to one of the demographics that we're really trying to educate, if that makes sense, and enable is the pen testing community. Like the majority of us as security professionals at one point in our career have done red teaming, pen testing, have broken things, and ironically, that group is not really the ones that scope in firmware attacks in their engagements when they have a limited scope engagement as a red team. So what we're trying to do is arm them with tools and techniques and capabilities so they can scope that in, so you can start bringing the awareness, because the purpose of red teaming has served the same function for a long time. And for firmware, we need the same function served for awareness, so that the whole organization sees and believes and knows that they know irrefutably that these attacks are not only just possible, but even potentially likely, and that the impacts could be grave. Right. So when you go to the talk or see the talk on Saturday at 10 a.m., wait for the end of the talk and wait for the resources that might show up on a slide. So we can start enabling this community.
Do you see tools that are available? I mean, obviously, Eclypsium's a great example of this level of protection, and you're one of the few names out there kind of bringing this awareness and also providing the protections. From a kind of a lower end budget standpoint, or small business, or people out there trying to figure out like, okay, how do I address this with a limited security staff or even knowledge about it? What kind of tools and resources are there to kind of get that conversation going and start looking at things?
Well, the smaller organizations in a large percent of the time are left out hanging out to dry because they don't have the tools, and if they have the tools, they don't have the people to use them. And they don't have, the maturity and the integration and the velocity and the cadence that you need to really make all this kind of click in a way that matters. Meaning, you're actually making these changes to firmware before the bad day happens, before the adversary actually exploits them. And so they're, by and large, like there's no need to beat around the bush. They're kind of left out and hung to dry. That said, I can only speak for Eclypsium here, but like we have tons of customers that are smaller customers, and it, like I said, like the size and the maturity of an organization is an independent variable from whether or not they are firmware active, for lack of better words, and they've prioritized firmware. So very small organizations can definitely leverage Eclypsium extremely well and cost effectively to manage their firmware vulnerability landscape, do patching, find implants, find supply chain, stuff like that. So I think there is an answer. I'm not trying to pitch Eclypsium here, but that's why the platform was built, is it can scale up and down and left and right as well. It's very adaptable in terms of how you want to use the platform. But a small organization trying to leverage like the open source project Chipsec, of which our founder Yuriy is also the founder of, is very unlikely unless they happen to have the right person. And if they have that person, that means they're already super forward thinking about firmware. By that time, they've probably bought Eclypsium or another solution, if there is one. I don't really know if the solution does exactly what we do, but there are some other types of firmware solutions out there for sure.
How do we protect these systems inside of a event? I mean, essentially, we've got double, sometimes triple or more duty to take care of because we focus on the operating system in the kernel, but there are computer systems within the computer. How do we protect them? I mean, we've established that for convenience, we need that communication between the operating system and the other smaller operating systems and computers. How do we protect them? I mean, other than keeping them up to date, which is only going to get us so far. I mean, we translate that into, well, like I've patched all my stuff, but I still got owned somehow, right? Like, how do we protect, these subsystems?
Well, so if I'll use an analogy, almost like the antivirus community, since everybody speaks that language, right? Which is you have whitelists and blacklists, and we've been doing antivirus like that for 30 years plus. But more recently, you see things like AI, and you see behavioral understanding, and you see analysis, basically real-time analysis, whether that's a small algorithm that's doing it dynamically pre-execution, or if it's a cloud model. So when it comes to firmware, those analogies kind of hold up. But the difference is that in the firmware world, you don't have a massive corpus of known bad malware, right? You don't have virus total for firmware. I mean, There's firmware, malware, and virus total, don't get me wrong, but it's not a massive corpus. Instead, you have a massive corpus of known good firmware, and that's a lot of what Eclypsium does, is understand that, millions and millions and millions of firmware images that we know are good because they have provenance, because we never found a backdoor when we scan them and analyze them, when we do static heuristic analysis, etc. And so now people can benefit from knowing that this hash is good as long as it is exactly this hash from an integrity standpoint. But what you can't do is just only rely on hashing and to know if something is good. Because just because it's signed and is what it says it is, and it comes from that vendor, doesn't mean that vendor doesn't have an SSDLC problem, and you don't have malicious code, or that was used from off-the-shelf code over here, like the what was it? The TCP/IP vulnerabilities are in like 200 different network appliance manufacturers that were discovered yesterday or whatever, right? That one piece of source code goes out through all of hardware dumb, right? So you have to understand firmware, whether it's actually malicious or truly vulnerable, and that requires analysis and understanding and a little bit of tradecraft sometimes as well.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to think about from a monitoring perspective as well. How do I know when there's a behavior that's indicative of firmware that, like you said, Scott, maybe has a good signature, checks out, hashes match, but its behavior's not right. Are you guys working on like defining some of those like good versus bad behaviors?
Yeah, we we know of a lot of, especially given kind of where the team comes from, if that makes sense. Offense kind of stuff at this level, we're very good at that historically. Understand that like internal red teaming, doing things before bad guys do them, so we get better, right? So, but when as you know, like in the firmware world, like if you do a firmware update and it goes wrong, you do kind of run the risk of bricking a device. So one of the features people ask us for all the time is, hey, can you proactively update my firmware for me when you know it's vulnerable? On the day you find it's vulnerable or it's been modified or it has an implant, can you just update it with the latest known good automatically? Yep. And we're like, well, yeah, we actually have that feature. It's coded in there, and some of our customers actually use it in certain environments, and then with the right kind of flow where you have a test lab first, and you go small percentage of the real estate, and then you roll it out to larger ones. But you would not just want to have that feature kind of like automatically in there as an easy button, because if you do that, you could really hurt things, because the firmware world is very tricky, and the hardware world is tricky as well. So you have all these counterfeits, and you have less low tolerances coming out of China on certain chips now because of the supply shortage and the increase of velocity. They're trying to come up with chips, and all this leads to this world where like it's not a known where this model with this image is going to result in a good experience. Same model, same image on two different devices, you're going to get potentially two different results. And when you scale that kind of unknown, it's a tricky problem. But yeah, there's ways to do these kind of things. But the real truth, though, if I could be so blunt, is most of the problems are adversaries hitting known vulnerable, exploitable vulnerabilities for which there is a patch. So not O days, but like when there is a patch. The problem is that just like VPN appliances, firmware is much like that, where organizations go months or years, or they literally never patch it. And so why would an adversary worry about being crafty when it can grab something off the shelf and exploit something very easily when the exploit's been out for months or years?
Yeah, and I think the elephant in the room is the operational risk when you're talking about updating firmware is higher than your regular operating system. Because if you're in in fact, I did it yesterday, right? Operating system, it was updating, and then the system lost power. You can recover from that, right? Like it's fairly easy to recover from that when you're talking about the operating system, Linux or Windows. If it's firmware, there's not, because you're copying data directly to the flash and oftentimes, and that's why we always get those, the warnings of, do not let power, and even when we're updating a modern computer system and we're updating firmware, I think those of us that have been in tech for a while, we still cringe. We're still nervous because of that. The operational risk is higher because I could brick my own device, trying to protect it from attackers who maybe want to brick my device, which is the irony.
Indefinite catch-22 there. Yeah, there's other ways too. Like if you think about firmware as a problem space with vulnerabilities that can be exploited to great extent, like with great impact, one of the things you think about is like what direction the attacks actually come from. So they can come from supply chain, like we were just talking about, right, with the latest set of vulnerabilities. They can come in the form of a vulnerability or a backdoor or an implant or default, username and passwords that are burned in. Like there's lots of different ways threats arrive via firmware to the device for which now the device is vulnerable. But firmware also arrives from, let's say, the operating system, like in the case with TrickBot and TrickBoot, where you can get a spear phishing attachment, open that docx up, and all of a sudden, before you know it, your firmware is implanted or bricked, right? And so how do you like, you're asking the right question, how do you prevent against that? Well, yeah, hopefully you have a super good next-gen antivirus and email filtering and no insider threat and all of your security stack meant to prevent the operating system is working on every given Sunday. And we know that's never the case, and that Microsoft itself is impossible to even secure a number of vulnerabilities that come out just on the OS level code, right? So firmware, to protect it, you have to think through all these multiple vectors to understand if this is truly a critical device. Protecting it is not as simple as just patching. It's all that layered controls that you and I are already familiar with, but protecting the firmware right from it. So it's not an easy challenge, but that's literally why we Eclypsium took that challenge on, is because nobody else had really figured that out. And it's not a binary. Oh, we have the solution. It's not a magic bullet, right? It's hard work. It's a lot of automation. It's front loading. Understanding firmware images that you're scraping from hundreds of websites. Like, it's not easy, right? There's no one company that can actually just do this on their own, even if they wanted to, right?
Well, yeah, and Eufy is also part of a consortium. We did some interviews with folks from Megatrends and AMI, and it's a consortium. And I think the perception when we have these types of conversations, Scott, is that the folks that are basically developing the standards and the code that represents our modern BIOS and subsystems today don't care about security, which is largely not the case. Those folks very much care about the security and integrity of these systems. Do you work with some of these working groups to help improve their, I think, both not necessarily their knowledge, but their awareness of threats? Because I think they'd be open to that.
We work with a lot of groups. One of the things we're involved with is the NIST CCOE, the Center of Excellence, I guess is what that stands for, but specifically solving for in this case, the supply chain aspect, right? So us, RSA, Dell, HP, I think Seagate might be the last vendor there. We're trying to figure out, if I discover something operationally that's busted or vulnerable or implanted and malicious, how do I flow that information back up the supply chain?
Yep.
And so that now the OEM at the platform level can say, look, all of my customers globally, we have a problem here. This is what we need you to do, right? So how do you action operational awareness and discovery back up to the supply chain? So it's also part of what you hear about with the S-bomb, or if I'll show you a picture of our keychains this year, which is the F-bomb, which is always a big hit when people can drop the F-bomb keychain. I will get you guys some of these. Wait, can you see that?
Oh,
F-bomb.
nice.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, yeah.
Firmware build. Yeah, because it's not just the Dells and HPs of the world. Their BIOS comes from oftentimes a company like American Megatrends or Phoenix, right? The ones that you remember seeing, the splash screens and the, back in the day, they're largely responsible for supplying that code to the OEMs, who are then putting that in all of the different hardware and subsystems.
The first time I learned that was, I think it was Dan Farmer gave a talk at DEF CON probably 15 years ago now, or 12 years, something like that ago. And he did a short assessment of all the manufacturers and where the code came from. And I think it was 95% came from Taiwan, another 5% from China mainland. And he was looking at baseboard management controllers, right? The IPMI protocol. And those are complete, there's no difference between that talk he gave in 2012 and today. They're all busted. Even large OEMs like NVIDIA had, 9 CVEs on their baseboard management controllers via IPMI protocol that some customers were putting exposed to the internet, which is how those CVEs got discovered, luckily by a researcher, not a nation state. And that's on a DGX 100 box, which is a $250,000, $250,000 device designed for the next generation of AI. It's like eight cores in a box kind of thing, right? 4 or 8, I don't know what it was, but it's, how are we still doing this, right? I don't know if these organizations.
That's just the stuff getting looked at, though, too, right? Those are just the small bits that researchers are spending time on, that manufacturers or people like yourself are diving into. That's not even touching things like SSDs. We've got a whole Opal protocol, a SED protocol, access into the firmware on hard drives via the OS. There's a ton of stuff that is not even looked at outside of the stuff making the news. So this is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I used to have a different life, and about 16 years ago, I dealt with a large OEM HDD manufacturer, and they were implemented at the firmware level. And the reason why the adversary, which was a nation state, chose to do that is because they knew that at that time only drives of this size and configuration would only be the ones bought by this organization, right? And so because of that, it was only a small run of drives at a very large capacity that ended up in a certain data center or 2 or 3. And the mission was successful. It ran for, I can't remember, months and months before it was discovered, but it was an eye opener. And this was 15 years ago. Do we think they're not doing that now during a global trade war and a chip shortage and everything else going on? Of course they are. Absolutely everywhere. Most of these vulnerabilities, I don't believe that they're bugs or overlooked code because of a poor SSDLC. I believe a lot of these things are probably there for a very good reason. And the what people don't understand is if you take a snapshot in time, that's one view of the universe. But over the continuum of time, there's always these vulnerabilities on any given day. And that is the name of this game. It's the ability to continuously understand this and get ahead of it. Otherwise, the bad guys take advantage of that fact. Like they're always going to get in on any given day if there's always these backdoors in the form of vulnerabilities.
Well, I mean, sometimes they're there for reasons. I don't know, oftentimes, if they're good reasons. I mean, conspiracy and espionage could be a reason, right? Why it's there.
And maybe not a good reason.
Certainly I'm certain that happens, right? Oftentimes, it's the developers that put it in there, and either they forgot to take it out or it was just poorly implemented. Reason why some of these backdoors were put into place.
Or they were pushed to get a product out or code out in a short amount of time, and they needed a way to hot fix, hot patch, and continue that update process because, this is a capitalist environment. They have deadlines, they have products to ship, and sometimes that is a business risk decision that happens maybe a bit too much, but that
would never happen.
You're putting pressure on your third party because I need that web server code that I'm going to embed in my millions of embedded devices I'm going to sell, and we're ready to go to market, and you end up with things like Joel's backdoor, which is a horrible reason to have a backdoor. It was like the way the web interface communicated with the firmware. And so there was, to your point, Scott, right? There was a reason. It just wasn't a very good one from an architecture. I don't even think, certainly security architecture was flawed there, but in software design and architecture, it was grossly flawed and negligent.
But like Shadowhammer is a great example. Like their aces goes, bad guys get their cert, sign the firmware, and it goes right to your firmware. And you're like, you as a victim, you don't even know that's happening. You have no means of seeing that happen. You have no way to get ahead of that. That was not in your tabletop exercise before that that campaign unveiled itself, right? Like it's so frustrating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any more questions for Scott? Scott, anything else?
Yeah, I have something.
Yeah, go for it.
So I just ran in to these guys on the way down here to find a quiet space. The specific hackers, 101, you get it. And I met a gentleman named Marco who's running point on that. They're out of San Francisco, but they do the whole West Coast. And if there's one theme for Black Hat this year, just like we had our suite upstairs at Eclypsium, and people are learning literally soldering and learning the value of understanding a PCB board and just getting a feel for it. A lot of young folks coming through. Like there's one theme on everybody I've talked to this entire conference, which is the extreme need to grow a new generation of people that are aware and understand these foundational kind of computing concepts rather than coming out of school and just having memorized at a very narrow field certain knowledge, right? So we're trying to provide this wisdom framework for kids so they don't just like have the knowledge and watched all the YouTube videos and now they pass the hacking exam. Then we don't understand these problems, right? Which is like what your show is so great at is exploring the problem so people can understand it. So Pacific Hackers, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. I was talking to woo-woo folks that, there's this massive drive right now to mentor people and bring them into this field. And it couldn't happen at a more important time. And it's also helping bring a more diverse group into this field, both in terms of sex and all different walks of life are just coming into this field finally. So we're doing it right, I think. And I just feel like this year it's been a theme for the last 20 years, but like this year is, for some reason, it ends up being, this conference has been very human. It's been like, how has COVID been for you? Like, how has it been to secure environments during COVID? Like, it's just like a very human experience this year. It's not about the tech and it nearly as much as it's about like all of us bootstrapping our entire community again from the ground up, new, going into the next 20, 30 years. So.
Fantastic. Scott, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me. I can't wait to see you guys.
Yes, can't wait to see you as well in person.
Yeah.
For folks who want to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Eclypsium. Stay tuned. Coming up next, the security news for this week. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Cybercriminals are using social engineering, loaded with urgency and fear, to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement: Cyber Risk Alliance, in partnership with InfraGard, has launched the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Benchmark Study. Measure your readiness for ransomware by completing the survey and getting your score by visiting securityweekly.com/CIRB. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they're all available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. In addition to Bill Brenner here in studio, we've got a new host joining us for this segment. Of course, he's not new to the show, just new to this particular episode. Mr. Joff Thayer is in the house. Joff, welcome.
G'day, Paul. How are you? It's good to be here.
Doing great, my friend. And you've got an announcement, which I imagine is you're teaching one of your classes, right? You've got regex and you've got a C2 infrastructure.
Should I do that now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just finished teaching regular expressions the other week. Another run of that, and it was absolutely fantastic. By the way, people love that class. It's just so much fun. But anyway, upcoming this August 30th, starting Monday, August the 30th, I am teaching my Enterprise Attacker Emulation and C2 Implant Development class. See, I'm getting used to saying that now. It's a 16-hour class, so we do 4 hours a day. We start early on the Monday. We start 11 a.m. Eastern time, go through to 4. We have a little pre-show banter there, and then we do 12 to 4 for the remaining days. And in the class, well, we do a whole lot of things. We do some commodity C2 stuff. We do some defensive landscape talk, some threat modeling, C2 channel. We talk about a custom C2 channel. We get into some development. We talk about C#, Python. We talk about Golang. Talk about lots of different shellcode execution methods. And we talk a little, future directions and future techniques that you can apply for red teamers and I guess purple teamers as well to use. And we just have a whole lot of fun.
It sounds awesome. I wanted to ask you if you're like me and maybe have a little bit of C development experience, but mostly Python. Picking up Golang, I would imagine, is not all that terrible to kind of pivot to?
No, it's not really, in the context of the class. So what I do is I give out a lot of source code as I'm teaching this. So I try to make it so that you sort of fill in the blanks and rearrange pieces, but I don't let you, I don't leave you at the deep end so that you have to develop this from the ground up when we're teaching. But it does help if you have some basic programming familiarity, because then you will be able to pick up the syntax of these other languages. And Golang, if you've been exposed to a little bit of C or C++ or C#, some combination of that, Golang will feel fairly intuitive to you because it really is based off those foundational languages.
Yeah,
awesome. I was just about to ask, how much programming experience do you need to come into this class?
So it varies. There's a pretty good chance that I'm going to develop something that is going to be language specific at some point in the future. I don't want to overpromise here, but I am thinking about doing a C# for offensive operators kind of class in the future, because I really think that would be a helpful thing, and people have expressed interest in it. Mostly because there is some reaction to this class where people come out and go, well, this is really great, but you've got such a huge survey of different things. I'd like to kind of dive deeper into some things. And, that's a response to that. It's not so much dive deeper into the techniques, because a lot of the C2 channel and shellcode delivery techniques that I present do translate nicely across languages. It's more, can I learn a little bit more about the programming aspect so I can get better at that language?
Right.
So
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff.
Hey, Paul, if you don't mind, another real quick. We mentioned last week that mine and a few other friends, SANS IoT hacking course, SEC 556, went live. Well, it went live, but it wasn't open for registration. But now, within the last couple of days, you can go to sans.org/SEC556, and you can register for the upcoming virtual Beta 1. So the beta course is where we get to deliver the class and find out what's wrong with the delivery, figure out what we need to fix, and you get a 50% discount for coming to that early class.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice.
We put that one up Tuesday, and there's already 10 registrations.
Nice.
Great.
Yeah,
good stuff.
Oh, while we're on plugs, I forgot to mention one other date. For those of you that are interested in coming to Wild West Hackin' Fest this September, I know COVID variant Delta is present amongst us, and there is a little bit of reticence, but I am teaching the class again live at Wild West Hackin' Fest the Tuesday, Wednesday before the conference, which is September 21 and 22. And I'm also teaching virtual, so it's a live virtual hybrid there. Awesome. But I hope I will see some friends actually at the conference, irregardless of the class, it's going to be a bunch of fun. So,
fantastic.
Cool.
I thought my story number 4 is an interesting place to start, like how other people that maybe aren't entrenched in cybersecurity, like many of us, kind of look at ARP poisoning, because I think it's always kind of interesting to get that kind of this felt like it was kind of an outsider's view. Like, basically, I had to read the article a few times, not because of the technical content, but because of like the approach. Like, what's your goal? Like, in this article was like, well, my goal is I'm on a congested network at a college or university, and basically, like, I don't think they understand it to this level. Like, they want to kick other people off the network so they get more bandwidth. And so someone created this tool called Netcut. And when you look at Netcut, it's just like a really simple GUI that does ARP cache poisoning to like take people offline. I'm like, this is really evil.
The tool itself
Creative.
Looks a lot like Disney Circle's approach to network access blocking.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when they poison, did you read actually where they're sending people? Are they just sort of giving them a bogus address so they just talk to nothing, or?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, I'm not sure where they're sending people once they cut them, right? I guess it doesn't matter if you were.
And perhaps they don't know either.
Yeah, that's the sense
which could have some very interesting results if 5 years down the line.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Especially if they keep that running.
I imagine they're just poisoning their default router gateway to a bogus address, so they're just talking to nothing, which would certainly give them more bandwidth, right? Because then they get to use the legitimate router gateway, and everything's good to go.
I was like, but I guess my whole thing is like, if you play games like this, you're gonna end up getting hurt. Certainly network administrators are not going to be too keen on you running these kinds of tools. And of course,
a lot of the wireless access points are going to kick you off for messing with ARP too. Like most of the good ones and or any of the next gen appliances watch for this like type of ARP traffic, and they'll 100% deauth you and add your MAC address into a blacklist. So I'd be very careful running this.
Or alternatively, a lot of them are just going to do peer-to-peer traffic isolation anyway, so you can try, but you're not going to get anywhere with it.
Correct. He mentions
that tool's not going to do a lot.
Yeah, he mentions that in the article as well. But then I don't know, he wrote some kind of script that the writing was really hard to understand exactly what they were doing, like, because it wasn't a very well written article, and he was trying to describe what he was doing with, I think, probably a lack of full understanding of how layer 2 and ARP actually works. So it was like hacking when we first got into it. Like yes. Like, I think I can do this. I mean, we all started in some place, so I don't want to knock the person I want to reiterate, like, you should have permission and you shouldn't pull shenanigans like this on a network, and maybe then ask people and spend the time to fully understand it. Because the reasons for doing this were nefarious. Like, just knocking other people offline is, like, that's not cool.
Not cool.
There were also, along those lines, 2 articles about a brief history of cryptography. Again, this was not what the article claimed to be. This was not what the title said it was. It was not a brief history of cryptography. It was basically like, oh, Diffie and Hellman came up, with public key cryptography, and that was the beginning. I'm like, no, that really wasn't the beginning of cryptography. And ironically, and so my advice to them, like, I don't want to discourage people that want to write articles like that, because you should, right? Do the research and write an article to convey your thoughts. I think helps your understanding of it. But find a mentor. I mean, I'm sure any of us would happily volunteer to help people that want to write articles like this to keep them on the right track. And, not so much as an editor, but a reviewer to say, like, what are you trying to accomplish, and explain things. My story number 5 actually was a really great article on the history of crypto, right? Talked about hieroglyphics and how, early forms of cryptography, and actually did a pretty good job, I thought, of capturing some of the history behind it. So it was ironic. I just happened to find these 2 articles, like one totally not the one you want to read, and the other one actually pretty good.
I love that those articles are out there. Not the ones that are inaccurate, but the fundamentals articles. I think we forget in the industry all too often, and one of my actual pet peeves is the way people don't understand DNS, by the way.
Yes.
But we forget all too often that there are some fundamentals that everybody needs to be reminded of, and an accurate description of cryptography fundamentals. That's a really important thing for a lot of us.
And it's really hard to do, because we've touched on it on previous segments, and some listeners have said, like, you really didn't get that right. And I think maybe that's true, but we're also trying to talk about it at such a higher level that it leaves it open for interpretation that could be like, oh, sure, you got that wrong, right? And it's our fault for starting at that high level, but not kind of digging into some of the details, which arguably have escaped a lot of our minds, because we really don't, to create an SSL certificate, key pair, we don't really need to know how the math and the protocol works. Well, we just need to be able to create the certificate, right?
That's an interesting comment, because there's one aspect of symmetric key cryptography in the mathematics that's really mysterious, and that is the construction of S boxes. And when you hear a mathematician talk about an S box, they never really can explain it well. It's just like it's a substitution box, and we don't know what the imagination of the cryptographer, why they decided this substitution versus this other substitution. Like, this is like the voodoo magic in the cryptography algorithm, right?
And these are from the mathematicians.
Everything else people understand, right? They understand shifting left and shifting right and inverting things and whatever. But when they get to S boxes, they're like, ooh, this stuff's mysterious, right? And all of that is the mathematics of symmetric key cryptography, which is much, much deeper than the way that X509 TLS certificate-based systems work, right?
Yeah,
much deeper.
We need some segments on that. I think is what we've agreed as hosts, that we should start tackling some of these.
I think we volunteer Jeff, because he's not here, to explain it all at a deep mathematical level, and then we just sit back and we're like Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
We just heckle him from the peanut gallery.
We've talked about doing that MST3K thing. Now we can do it for Jeff when he explains cryptography.
That's right. We'll call it, Cyber Nerd 3K, and we'll just be throwing shit at him.
Bill.
Yeah, great.
For all of the security articles that I've written over 18 years, to this day, nothing frightens me more than doing an article about cryptography.
Yeah, because right. There's always someone that knows it better than you, is what I've found, especially with cryptography.
There's that. I've also found, and this is just my personal writing experience, but I always have tried to get to the human element of anything I write about, and it's hard to get to the human element. And you would think that it wouldn't be that way, because if you're interviewing, I've interviewed Diffie and Hellman separately.
Yep.
Fascinating interviews, but just struggling to keep up, especially with Diffie. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
I've interviewed Diffie as well.
Yeah.
We had Whit Diffie on the show, didn't
You
we?
did. You
I know
did.
we did.
Yeah. But Bill,
He was
you know,
hysterical.
but Bill,
I
you know
loved
what this makes you? Old.
Yeah.
18 years, and a huge accomplishment.
Absolutely.
Hey, he just called you old. He's sitting right next to you. You can throw stuff at him, Bill.
well, you know, he's not wrong. So
I mean,
but yeah, so just for our listeners too, so we hear you, and we want to make sure we get it right and bring you the information that you want. So we've made a pledge that we're going to bring on some of it will come from hosts that have expertise in certain areas of. I mean, cryptography is obviously a large subject matter, so some of it may come from hosts and some of it may come from external third parties. But I think it's one of those things that. We kind of forget some of the I think it was Dimitri, one of our listeners, was like, yeah, some of this stuff is like you study it for a test or you learn it for this project and then you forget about it, right?
Yeah.
And for the record, when I call Bill old, it's nothing but love. Because Paul, how many years have we been doing this for?
This is our 16th year.
Yeah.
Old.
And who's old
Old.
now?
Yeah.
Who's old now?
Old. Exactly.
Wait, how long have I been hanging out with you guys? At least
You
five
had
of
you
them.
had hair.
I had.
it's hard to believe that the ShmooCon where I made the Klingon wedding table crack was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
11 years ago.
Yep. Oh, and so,
Yeah.
Joff, you mentioned DNS. I want to quickly segue into my story number 15, where researchers at Wix figured out a DNS loophole that I'm still kind of struggling to understand. And
It's
I don't want to
crazy.
say the article wasn't well written, but it was written in such a way it was difficult for me to understand, like the motivation and the why, and then also kind of specifically the how. It kind of, in my experience with Route 53, is very light. I actually had to help some folks with Route 53, and I'm like, well, I know DNS, and then they get into like A-name records, and I'm like, the hell's an A-name record? When did that come about? I never heard of that before. And the way that Route 53 does things with DNS is very different from, like, I'm editing my bind files by hand. I'm like, wait a minute, why can't I understand Route 53? Like, they're doing things differently. And so basically the crux of the attack was that registering certain special domains, specifically the name of the server itself, had unexpected consequences, right? So you would kind of, what I understood was you would register in your Route 53 instance a name that overlapped with one of the 16 authoritative DNS servers that Amazon was using in DNS. Did I understand that correctly?
Or 2,000 DNS servers. Like you're basically making a hosted zone for the official DNS servers of whichever registrar provider you're using that hosts DNS as well. And so there's kind of two aspects there, right? Like you're leveraging your ability to change records and register without verification names within inside of a registrar that also contains host records that's on a shared DNS, a managed DNS platform. So you're creating a hosted zone. And by doing that, that basically tells the other services that are within inside of that or utilizing those name servers that you're part of that name server, and then traffic begins to flow to you and causes kind of unintentional consequences to names or providers that are hosted within inside of that DNS resolution.
It allows me to register an authoritative DNS server.
So you're not authoritative. That's kind of the catch. You're technically you're utilizing a name that is kind of authoritative for it, but because it's hosted and you're utilizing that special name, there's kind of unintended consequences of how that multi-tenant traffic isolation is happening, and it begins to break that, and traffic begins to take that tenant isolation and route traffic.
Yeah, doesn't it come down to, I just read a little bit of the article, it comes down to also how Microsoft's using dynamic DNS to update the DNS server that you're feeding the client end, and they've done this for years. And ultimately, this thing amounts to being a bastardization of DNS, which irritates the living shit out of me, right?
Well, this is in AWS specifically as well.
Yeah, but people are
it's in any
screwing over
number.
DNS.
They tested on
DNS
those
was
three.
always intended
Gotcha.
to be a local entity. right? Microsoft's making the assumption on their endpoints that if you're doing dynamic DNS to update the DNS server, it's something that's in your local network, right? It's not something that's across the internet. Okay. Josh Wright and I are in the middle of writing some pretty large blog entries on DNS, so we're going to drop some stuff before long.
Oh, good. Awesome.
But that's a teaser. I've got to get with Josh and get things moving forward.
Such a tease.
But
yeah. So the way Amazon's doing DNS and Route 53, I think falls in your category, Joff, of like just twisting it in ways it was never intended, right?
It's not designed that way.
Yeah.
It's just not designed that way, right? I mean, I'm channeling Paul Vixie here, right? I mean, if you heard Paul talk at Wild West and Way West, and he's talking about the way these very large commercial vendors are twisting the intent of DNS and really screwing it up. And for their own purposes. I mean, it comes down to, again, surveillance capitalism and collecting data.
And because the interesting thing is, I didn't know this until recently, Amazon is a registrar. So when you configure Route 53, you can go, I want this domain. And Amazon goes, cool. Like, you can give me money, and you can register this domain right through Amazon. Like, you don't have to go to Namecheap or register or wherever.
Right.
But that's kind of ubiquitous. That's kind of the key there, right? Is that managed... the managed DNS providers, like Google Cloud, Google Cloud, Akamai, all of those are the same exact way. So this vulnerability exists in all of those. I'm assuming it was fixed in Microsoft.
Yeah.
So it's just the fact that we're bending DNS for this multi-tenancy cloud hybrid managed DNS providers that are also registrars. Like that's kind of where a lot of this is stemmed from, and it's a hard problem to address, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, how did that work out for Dyn? I mean, just saying. Anyway.
Larry, Lee, anyone?
An ugly comment.
Stories?
We got to do one of Lee's. There was one of Lee's that I really wanted to get into. It was the facial recognition one.
Oh, I had that one too. Oh man,
yes. Master faces.
Master faces.
Yes.
That was the master faces are terrifying looking.
Oh yeah.
Which story is this, please?
Yeah, this is
Larry's number 3.
Larry's number 3.
Yeah,
these are like master
Lee also
keys.
had it too.
That's crazy.
Okay.
I did?
Yeah. Let's see here.
Yeah, this was an Israeli company that figured out a way to do nine different master faces using some neural net pathways and analyzing 3 of the common facial recognition libraries, and they basically broke it via 9 different mutated faces. And the math is fascinating. I've spent a ton of time breaking facial recognition over the last 2 years, and the way they did this is very, very similar to some stuff I was looking at, but they exponentially leverage some higher math that is just incredible and frankly terrifying, and kind of what we knew from the point of view, like 40 to 60% of all facial recognition could get broke with just 9 generated images. So again, this is a bad thing from the standpoint of like all of the technologies leveraging it.
If this works similar to like a master key for a lock, I still have to present this face to the facial recognition point of scan
device. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Which you can do with an image, and there's like liveliness tests. There's a bunch of IR things, but we've since proven, and there's several tests that for companies that we've done, there's ways around that. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can leverage these images to kind of break these things, especially if you're interacting at like the API or SDK level and passing these images in the form of something outside of just the IR camera or hitting the stream of the IR camera on the chip.
Gotcha.
Isn't this also a case of when AI turns against AI, right? Because I imagine as they developed...
That is.
As they developed
the models... That is exactly what this is.
Yeah, as they develop the models to learn the algorithm, they're basically training another AI model to...
attack another AI model.
Right. Yep. And we've done this in the offensive industry as well. I mean, there's some work now where people are saying, well, hey, EDRs and vendors that are using AI models against our malware, well, we're just going to do the same thing you're doing, and our model's going to learn your model, and we're going to work our way around it. So too bad, so sad.
Yeah, there's some interesting ML and AI research going into the offensive space. In fact, Will Muhax is over at Microsoft now doing some very, very interesting work around offensive ML and the implications of what that can actually end up leading to. They did some initial work, I think 2 years ago. They released something at Black Hat, my cousin Nick and Will both, where they were able to utilize and graph out the full ML decision tree and come up with keywords that they could put into an email and get by any email filter, right? And that's
right. I remember seeing
ML
that.
to do that.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, and they did a great job at that, and in fact, I've leveraged that work, which is awesome. I feel like we need to go bwahaha right now or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some big implications for how we start to leverage these technologies, and it's going to get exponentially worse, and that's something that people aren't thinking about. There's a lot of defensive effort and big data that's leveraging all these ML and AI charts to kind of figure things out. But what happens when those start to get used against them? Like those neural networks are going to become kind of scary.
Yep.
So interesting. As I was looking through things, Larry's number 4 caught my attention because of my number 7 story. My number 7 story is abuses of location technology used in the shipping, which we've talked about before in terms of GPS spoofing. But then Larry's story is about a ship that looks like it's been hijacked, but they're not sure. And I thought, is that an instance of a faked location, or is that for real?
So, and that said, and it mainly, in the case of my story, it may not even be about the faked location. In that both your story and my story are using AIS for ship positioning, and much like ADSB, clear text protocol, easily spoofed, and can be used to alter course for both aircraft and ships on quote automatic pilot, or alter the decision of an actual pilot observing these messages as well. In the case of my story, the AIS messages that were being sent were not necessarily spoofing the location, but they were spoofing status messages, basically saying that the vessel was not under command, meaning that there was some problem that they couldn't steer, they couldn't propel in either forward or reverse. So spoofing different types of messages.
Interesting, because the one I saw for the mitigation on the AIS messing around was you can get a satellite image and you can use that to see what's really there, as opposed to the other. Basically it's a second source, a little harder to spoof, but obviously not something you just do in 5 seconds.
Right.
So I assume in the case of the missing ship, they've done something like that to see where the hell it is, to see if they can find it.
Yeah, it looks like they deployed aircraft to see if they can locate it. Yep.
This would be an interesting piracy. Like if you're able to just take control of the GPS and navigation system, have it deploy to waters that you control, and thus take dominance and dominion over something in your waters, like that's pretty legit.
Yep. Yeah, and that was similar types of things that we were trying to detect and combat with the Weilin project that Mike and I talked about, so that you could have a, quote, known good and compare that to other systems that were reporting potentially differences, like AIS, ADSB, and other potential reception sources. So, like, you could compare your location from GPS to, like, Baidu or GLONASS, depending on where you were on the planet.
The military ships are exempt from having to use AIX, but non-military are not. Although the military ships use them in high traffic areas because that's how they can see where everybody is. It's another source of information. So there is still a potential for a hack in that scenario. It's interesting stuff. I mean, it's like, dang. You forget what's just a clear text protocol that could be messed with. You think it's authoritative.
Yep. Like you start getting attribution is hard. Like let's send some AIS messages that maybe you're receiving your own, or you're receiving stuff from other ships, or ground stations are receiving AIS messages and saying, "Oh, hey, the U.S.'s ship is on the," or in the case of the one that I saw from the UK, a UK vessel was just off the coast of national waters, and I forget which country. And the nationals were out there harassing the Brits, saying, "Hey, you're in our waters," and the Brits are like, "No, we're not." Like, well, maybe we spoof AIS to say that the ship is in national waters, and then cause an incident because the country fires upon somebody in international waters.
Uh-oh.
Whoops.
And that's where things can go really wrong.
This is why you need to encrypt and authenticate your protocols, people.
No. Device identity is important. Is that a drinking penalty? I think so.
It should be. Drink, Lee.
I think it is. We'll drink to it.
Not like we need an excuse, right?
Not like we need an excuse, yes.
I had an article about Windows container escapes.
Ooh.
And I find it interesting when we say Windows container because there's like Hyper-V containers and then there's like Docker containers and there's like namespace collision on the word container when we talk about containers on Windows. This felt to me, because they mentioned Kubernetes, that it was an escape for a Docker or Kubernetes, or whether it's a container running in Kubernetes or whether it's straight container, a breakout feature that used the file system, which those kinds of breakouts exist on Linux systems as well. And Microsoft's guidance I thought was interesting is they say you should not use Windows containers as a security feature. They recommend using strictly Hyper-V containers for anything that relies on containerization as a security boundary. So my question was, so should you run a container inside of or orchestrate it with Kubernetes and then run your Kubernetes inside of a Hyper-V container?
Yes.
Right? That made sense to me. I like containers so much, I put a container inside your container.
Yeah.
Which is on top of a virtual host, on top of a physical host, or maybe on top of a virtual host.
And then that can all run
host.
inside of a VM that's running. Yeah.
How many layers deep can we go?
I've got a headache.
Yes.
It's only in one version of the reality, Lee, that you have a headache.
Oh, good. I'm glad the other times I don't.
Right?
So did I get that right? Tyler's like really studying. I can tell he's studying, trying to grok it all.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of general guidance for containers in general, right? Like there are certain controls and boundaries that containers are good at and are going to provide. But you start to talk about Kubernetes, and a lot of this was not designed as a security boundary.
Right.
Just like trust and Active Directory, that's not really a security boundary. Domains within inside of the same forest, not a security boundary. Like these are concepts by design are like that, and I think this is one of those that it applies not just to the Windows side, but Hyper-V is very, very well designed from a security standpoint, and they take all the way down to the bare metal and even down to like the TPM level, and VMware is the same way. They're integrating things like secure boot and TPM with authorized boot image verification and validation. Those are all done at the hypervisor level all the way up, from bare metal up. Containers are a little bit different. You don't have some of that luxury just based on the way the containers are actually designed and designed to be implemented. And so just using things for where they're designed to be used and keeping security boundaries where they're supposed to be kept. That's just general good practice for especially things like hypervisors and containers.
Yeah. One of the interesting comments in there, this reminds me of conversations, Paul, we've had about, running containers, right? Is it says any process running in a Windows Server container should be assumed to have the same privileges admin on the host, and which in this case is the Kubernetes node.
Right.
So we've talked about the risks of privileged containers, and it sounds like we're right back there. We're running as admin or we're running as root again, and I'm glad the Hyper-V can secure it, but that just feels like a flaw in the container implementation.
Yep. Because, containers are essentially like a glorified chroot jail. But if your chroot is running as root, then you're still root. And
root.
I interviewed a CyberArk researcher that created Kubesploit, which is a framework very similar to Metasploit that allows you to basically, if you get shell in a container, You can upload the like air quotes interpreter, right? You upload a little piece of code. It talks back to the framework and can start executing things, including escapes. Those escapes can also, if it's running in Kubernetes, exploit Kubernetes flaws to basically control the entire Kubernetes cluster if it's misconfigured properly. That's what we
misconfigured properly. I like that.
Yes, misconfigured properly. Evie and I agreed that like most of the things that he was exploiting in this framework were due to misconfiguration, such as one being like containers running as root. He's like, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people still run containers as root. And I mean, you can clean up Docker Hub all you want, but larger firms that have their own Kubernetes clusters, what Avi found was, hey, there's a problem, must be permissions, like just run the container as root, and hey, it works, and we'll go fix it later, and they never do.
Push it to production, we'll fix it later.
The root of the problem.
It is the root.
We'll put that hot patching mechanism in later so we can fix that.
Right.
That was not a bad joke. That was
we were constrained on time, but the other thing was, like, root is also a very interesting concept in Linux and to a certain extent Unix systems, but in the context of Linux, there are other ways to obtain privileges that are the equivalent, even higher than root, through various different mechanisms. A lot of the container escapes rely on things like seccomp and other privileges within Linux that can be manipulated, that user permissions really are just one layer. There's lots of other different layers of permissions within Linux systems. And usually that's how they're doing the container. So as a developer, for example, you say, oh, great, I'm not running my container as root, but I'm giving it all of the privileges that you could give to a container, which is essentially the same thing as, like, those privileges say, I can load a kernel module, and that kernel module can shovel me back a root shell. Okay, I'm not running as root, but I'm still allowing through those various other permissions.
So one of my questions that came out as reading this is that, as you head down the article, it talks about Palo Alto's ability to detect this stuff. I'm wondering, out in Azure, Microsoft has a huge security framework that I'm wondering if it can detect the stuff being improperly configured. I know where it's dialed in on stuff. Boy, does it let you know when things aren't right.
Yeah, but Microsoft's also had problems in their containerization in Azure that have led to a lot of privilege. It's very similar to what I was describing. Yeah, similar kinds of issues.
Just because it's working doesn't mean you're done, right?
That's it. Also kind of in the, like, I put a container inside your container. Cobalt Strike.
Cobalt.
Right? Hot Cobalt. So a good tool used by bad people has a vulnerability that good people can use against bad people using the good tool, is how I summarize it.
Bad people against other bad people.
Or bad people against good people.
Right? Good people against good people. I guess it's pretty ubiquitous.
I think I just got whiplash.
It sounds like a song here. Good.
It's a pretty cool vulnerability. Honestly, it allows you to register fake beacons, and beacons are the C2 command and control traffic that goes back and forth between the client and the server. Yeah. Those beacons, when you can register those fake beacons back to the server via this vulnerability, which is I believe it was CV, it was like 36.7 something, 790.
798. Yeah.
Yeah. So they utilize that CVE. And you can do a bunch of tasks. You can register an unlimited number of these fake beacons and then send tasks up to the server and basically do a denial of service against the server. And that'll basically take down the Cobalt Strike server until you reboot it. You can do an unlimited amount of these tasks and have that tasking continue to happen, thus causing that command and control server to be rendered useless. It's kind of a cool idea.
Can you put limitations in Cobalt Strike, like it'll only accept so many beacons? Right, I would imagine that's a way to, because it's basically a memory exhaustion, but you can combat memory exhaustion in any program by limiting the number, putting a hard limit on there, no?
So that's not built into Cobalt Strike itself, as far as I'm aware. But if you're doing your due diligence as a C2 infrastructure operator, you're probably running your C2 channels through some well-known CDN, and it's really trivial to drop some firewall rules on that.
Absolutely.
You control it at the network layer, Joff, as to how many connections. You limit the connections of the network layer, essentially.
Yep.
But
And
now
or use good
I've seen this
redirectors
thing in
and-
action, actually. I've seen it against my own infrastructures
same.
play out. So I think it's been around for some time.
Yeah, same. And the other one too that
Since
becomes
March.
interesting too is that, the world has changed over the last almost 2 years. Like putting those firewall rules in to only have devices connect to your C2 from enterprise IPs. Maybe they're working from home and don't have split tunnel VPN or don't have a VPN on at the time, and that another challenge there.
Yeah. I mean, there's some challenges, obviously.
Yeah,
when you're
or you
running
can
an
update
attack
to Cobalt
infrastructure.
Strike 4.4. It's been patched. Rafi took a little while to patch this. The fundamental design of how the connection is established for the initial beacon request back to the server, I imagine, took a little bit of reworking. So it did take a little bit to patch, but it is 4.4 fixes it, and it's
Well,
super
yeah,
stable.
and I'm sure the regression testing was huge, right? Because if you're changing the way beacons communicate back to the server, that is a fundamental function of Cobalt Strike. And so you make, code changes in that part of the code. You're like, I got to make sure
and
I
it's all
didn't break
malleable
anything.
too. So your traffic can be, all malleable. You got your profiles, and you're talking about, like you said, a very fundamental core. Whether it's HTTPS, DNS, external C2, through other means and channels.
I
Like
hate fixing
there's a
bugs
lot
like
of code.
that. Yeah, it's a pain in the butt. But good for him for fixing it. So interesting. Cisco patches a critical vulnerability in small business VPN routers. I feel like we cover this story all the time, and I kind of break it down into like 4 things that are always maybe not always, but most of the time true. Like one, it's often the web interface on an appliance or IoT device.
Very
2,
common. Yeah.
it's never supposed to be exposed to the internet. 3, scans always show that there's thousands or some certain number that are exposed to the internet. And 4, it always allows air quotes specially crafted HTTP requests to effective device to either cause denial of service or remote code execution. Hence, we get the patch from Cisco that the vulnerability was exploiting a bug could allow an unauthenticated attacker to send specially crafted HTTP requests to an affected device, which could allow them to execute arbitrary code or cause denial of service conditions. This affects the web management interface, which is locally accessible by default. What I thought was interesting is it cannot be disabled. And I found this in IoT devices that certain management functions or services and or protocols, you can't turn them off. I mean, you could if you could get a hold of the firmware, reverse engineer it, make a change, put it all back together, and then reflash it on the device. But I've tried that. That's dicey.
And then, unless you have a dedicated management port, you can't put that on a management network, right? That's often a shared port, and that HTTP service runs on the LAN ports. It's not especially in the small and medium business routers. There's no dedicated management port for isolating that HTTP access from the inside.
Correct.
I mean, what cracks me up is first of all, Paul, your description of the recipe is dead on, right? It's a 4-step thing, and we've gone over it so many times.
Yeah, it is. You're right. It's the recipe.
It's the recipe.
You should write that out.
The part that always amuses me and makes me chuckle every single time is the specially crafted part.
Always specially crafted. 16 years doing this show, Joff. They've always used the term a specially crafted request.
And the thing is, it's not that special most of the time.
But it is crafted.
I mean, usually it's, in this case, you're reverse engineering the HTTP server, and you're looking for, as printf or mem copy, and it's a buffer overflow, or it's the specially crafted. I mentioned Joel's backdoor. That was a specific user agent string, which was it, like Joel's backdoor spelled backwards or something like that? In the user agent string would get treated differently and allow you to gain admin privileges to the machine. So specially crafted, I mean, we poke fun at it, but that's really kind of what we're after is what, looking at the code, what can we specially craft to make the code do something different?
It was crafted, and it was special.
And special.
It was special, all right. Yeah.
It just amazes me today that the web management interface is still the vector. Like, manufacturers just haven't learned that is essentially the low-hanging fruit in a lot of these cases. An attacker, I mean, when you're reverse engineering firmware, it's one of the first things that I look for. I'm like, all right, does it have a web management interface? What's that binary? Give me that binary. Let me, start pulling it apart, and usually you can find something in there.
Yeah, like 9 times out of 10, you're going to find an injection vulnerability of some sort in it.
You're going to find something.
What it is,
yeah,
it's going to be command injection. It's going to be probably command injection, most of the time. But, SQL injection, unlikely because there's probably no database.
Right, yeah. It's usually a bypass, too, authentication bypass.
Authentication bypass or command injection.
Because you're taking like a whole bunch of functionality and you're trying to squash it down into like this one small binary so it can run inside of firmware running on a small device who's, let's be frank, in this case, like the purpose of this device is for a VPN router. It's not to have the world's most robust admin web interface. It just... So many times we've talked about this same exact situation. It's just astonishing. It's still here.
Just thinking again about my journalism days, I've written the same exact story dozens and dozens of times.
Yes, that's what it's experienced here on the show. We've covered this story like dozens and dozens.
It's just funny the way attack techniques advance, the way technology in general advances. When it comes down to vulnerabilities, it's just the same shit.
Yeah,
over and over and over
again.
Well,
it's interesting. I want to, I think, go to my story number 11, which I wanted to foster a discussion here tonight. And this was an interview with someone from the EFF, Ava Galperin. Seems like a very smart lady, and she is the director of cybersecurity for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Now, she said stuff that maybe we still agree with, maybe we don't agree with today. She said nothing is unhackable. I think largely we're probably like behind all that, right? She said the more complicated the device, the more complicated software, it opens it up to interaction with other applications or research, and it's likely you're creating additional attack surface. Now, she also says playing offense is easy because all you need to do is find a vulnerability. Playing defense is hard because you need to defend yourself on all fronts all the time.
Against all possible and unknown vulnerabilities.
Right.
That's kind of I have to disagree with that statement. In fact, I did a talk.
Because it's cliche. I feel like we need to debate it.
That's a little too generalized, I think.
I mean...
Yeah.
Yeah, we go into that in that talk, right? Like, we as attackers fundamentally have to know everything about everything. We have to know all of the devices, all of the appliances, all the technologies, all the protocols, the underlying hardware, how chips communicate. We have to understand them at a fundamentally lower level and more in-depth level than any defender has to in any case in order to be able to break those.
Right.
And not
but
just
not only
environment.
Tyler, to your point, not only understand how they work, but how they're used, which are two totally different things, right? Yep. I often find myself reading a thing like they're attacking something. I'm like, all right, I'm getting like how it works kind of thing, but I'm like, how's it used? Because oftentimes we're abusing one or the other or both, how it's used and how it's built, right? And but you, as an attacker, you got to understand both those things.
Yeah, and you have to know that at a fundamental level, not just the technology, the application. We're talking about the binaries, the DLLs being loaded, how those DLLs interact with the OS at a user level, at a kernel level, the protocol and protocol stacks that are communicating from that binary all the way through to a hardware level, where that hardware level may have security protocols and implementations that are doing mitigating controls. How do we actually attack those? So from the beginning to the end of this, for almost all applications and technologies and all protocols, we're having to understand all that. So that being right once and it's easy to be an attacker, I call that a load of BS. And there's a reason that it takes us 10 to 20 years to get to the place where we can do a good job of emulating sophisticated attackers.
Well, and more to the point, we as offensive operators don't know everything. We actually have to have the ability to research and get up to speed on things really quickly. On the defender side, they have if they're doing it well, they have an understanding of the assets they're defending. So they have fixed context.
You said it. Sorry, I chuckled there, but you said if they were doing it well. So
I put a
you qualified that. Yeah, you did.
Yes.
They should have a context of an understanding of what they're defending, and then they should get well educated on the context and understanding on what they're defending. Now, I'm not saying they do it right all the time, but at least they do have a square box within which to drive at a certain period of time. I don't think the offensive side has that. We're always branching out in all different areas all the time,
I don't disagree that defense is hard, but I don't think that the hardest part is you have to defend yourself on all fronts all the time. I mean, that kind of is just scratching the surface. I think one of the most difficult, one of the most difficult things you have to do as a defender is like talk to people and convince them that security is important and that they have to do something about it. Like, that's why defense is hard, right? Not because you can't defend on all fronts all the time. You can put certain countermeasures in place on all of those fronts, but you're going to give up some of those fronts in some capacity, right? I think the real challenge is the people skills, the operationalization of security, and how it comes forth in your environment.
Don't forget the word scale. Scale does matter.
Yep. So you're just adding all those things, in my opinion, that makes all this harder. I'll go back to some things that Joff said earlier about which job is harder. And Joff said, I'm going to give you 5 payloads to run in your environment. And they said, yeah, if it works. And Joff's comment was, oh, it'll work.
That's that attacker mentality, right?
Because, but he only needed 1 out of those 5. And to me, that sort of, if I think about that from the perspective of which job is harder, who's winning in that scenario?
Yeah,
it's not the defender.
If we're comparing that, we're comparing apples and oranges. Like, why are we comparing which job is harder? Honestly, like, I don't want to ever say that defense is easy. Defense is very, very hard. Like, most of us have spent a long time in network admin and sysadmin work and development work, for that matter.
I want to dispel. I want to dispel the myth. I think is what we're getting at. Dispel the myth that attackers only have to be right once and defenders have to be right all the time. I think that's a complete myth. I think both roles have certain challenges. They're different challenges, but they have challenges. As a defender, we know you're never going to be right all the time. It's about being right in the right places at the right time with the right people, right? That's going to make you win. You can't keep tabs on everything today. I mean, maybe there was a time, 20, 30 years ago when you had one computer that, maybe that statement was true. Like, you could be right all the time because you could just look at that one log file there or whatever, and you knew all the modem lines coming in. But those days are gone. You have way too much attack surface today to even remotely keep you up at night. I have to be right all the time. Like, that's not a reality today. There's no defender that's right all the time.
Yeah, and I think the title kind of is also misleading. Like, there's a ton of great information in here that gets into many other debates that I think are much more fascinating than, red only has to be right once and defense, is really hard.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm picking on that as a discussion point. Ava is an extremely smart individual and had some wonderful things to say and is incredibly bright.
Sure.
Yeah, the boycott, disinvestment, the sanctions. Like, she got into a lot of the disinformation pieces that are very, very important. The Amnesty and NSO group stuff. Like, there's a ton of stuff in this article that are well worth the read. Very, very intriguing. That, again, the title, I think, was not a great thing.
We're just nitpicking out and we're plucking out certain things for the sheer purpose of discussion, right? And to kind of dispel some myths, right? And we're taking it out of context, basically, and I don't want that to reflect poorly on Ava because she's awesome.
But to take the article title out of context,
because you can, right?
Nothing is unhackable.
Which is also not true, Larry, because I know where you're going. Go ahead.
Yeah, because can we build something that is unhackable?
I don't know. Can we, Larry? Thinking about that as an exercise.
So my thought exercise comes back to something that I just watched this week, in that we're talking about computers and we're talking about all this stuff. So remove all the computers and move back to analog systems. Or mechanical systems, for that matter. And I watched this.
You know what you hack? The people.
No, you don't even need to do that. So in this particular, we could hack the people, right? In this particular case, I watch a show on YouTube called Vice Script Garage, and it's called that for a reason because he uses Vice scripts for everything, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff.
I'm down with that though. Vice scripts are pretty universal.
Yeah. So basically, the big thing for his channel is that he finds this vehicle that's been in a cow field for 30 years, and he brings a minimal set of tools and he gets the car running and he drives it home, like sometimes in excess of 600 miles. And I learned in the last 2 sets of episodes that I learned was that, like, if you know what you're doing, it's super easy to hotwire a car in the older analog systems. And it wasn't even that you were taking 2 wires together and you're putting them together and it starts.
That's just in the movies?
That's just, and that's exactly what he said. That's just in the movies.
Yeah.
And what you're finding is that when you turn the key, it pushes a mechanical rod that pushes a switch. Like, okay, so you just pull the switch down and you stick this thing in and you go vroom, like you hack the mechanical system. Because he had a car that he was working on that had literally no key in the column. And he took a piece out of the headliner, a piece of wire, and started the car with this piece of headliner, and that was his key for the 600-mile journey home.
It's awesome hacking.
Another one, he had a 1981 International Scout in a field for 20 years and had keys, but you could turn it to the accessory and everything would work. But you could turn it forward and it wouldn't work. So what did he do? He took apart the steering column and took this bar and went, bent the thing because it was pushing it too far. And then it starts.
So
I finished the book Exploding the Phone, which was really good. And we're trying to reach out to the author to get him on the show because he did a great job. And when we talk about some of the first phone system switches and the switching mechanism, as we know from the movies and TV back in the day, right, was an actual person. And that doesn't mean that they weren't hacking the phone system. They were just hacking the people so they would connect it to the right thing. It was basically social engineering. So, nothing's unhackable. Larry, you always used to give the example of a computer not connected to anything, buried in 20 feet of concrete is not hackable, but
it's not usable either.
It's not usable. But I'm going to social engineer the person who's looking over that, going, "Hey, I need to do maintenance on that." Right?
Yeah,
so we're going to go get that computer and do some air quotes maintenance on it. Right? So. Yeah, definitely. Usability and security is an interesting relationship.
Unrelated. Before we leave here tonight, I want you to look at my Audible library and pick out the book that I'm going to read next for what I've got in there, because I just finished the Masters of Deception on the way here.
Great book, right?
Yeah. Except for the audio quality, that sucked.
Yeah.
But I literally finished it as I was coming up to the light out here. And now I need to pick something new for the ride home and onward.
Yeah, I got the next one.
I'm currently listening to. Go ahead, John.
Does Audible allow you to create a friend's reading list? Because on
Amazon you can create it as an Amazon wish list, and I have it, and I put the link in our Discord. I'll stick it in again after the show.
Yeah,
awesome.
no, that'd be cool.
You can share now too, right? Like share audiobooks.
I think so.
Yeah. I'm not, maybe.
In any case, I've got a bunch of books that are sort of at the top of the list that I should, that I want to listen to. But tell me which one I should read next.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm listening. Well, so I'm listening to 3 books at the same time, depending on the audience. When it's my wife and I in the car, we're listening to the accounting of Apollo 13 from Gus Grissom and others. When the kids are in the car, we're listening to Code Girls.
Yeah. That's on my list.
Yep.
I haven't listened to it yet, but it's actually in my library. I bought it.
And when listening by myself, it's now to be determined. So.
Hold on. I had a place to bring us.
iOS 14.7.1. Get your damn phones updated. It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And your
what's
Macs.
going on? What's going on with that?
Yeah.
There's some CVEs and some bug fixes in there that they're not really. They're being pretty cagey about, and from what
Apple being cagey about vulnerabilities? No.
I know it's the first time, Paul. Just relax. They promise never to do it again.
My buddies over there were saying this one is being actively exploited and is very, very, very serious from the implications at a kernel level and maintaining access. So I don't know how much more serious it can get.
As Larry and Geoff click about this Mac.
Yep. I did want to talk about assless chaps.
What?
Okay.
Oh my!
First up, by definition, chaps are assless.
Yes.
Otherwise, they'd be pants.
Correct.
Okay.
What if they're MS chap?
Point.
What if they're MS chip? Microsoft chaps?
MS Chap V2
of the version 2 variety. Yes.
then they might be assless.
Well, no, they might not only be assless, they might be encapsulated too.
Well, it depends on the delivery method, right, Joff? If it's
MS Chat V2 is like it's in a Wi-Fi. It was in a
it's Microsoft. It's Microsoft.
It was in an EAP thing,
Yep,
right?
multiple.
It was buried inside of an EAP protocol, challenge response.
Yeah.
Yep. PEEP,
Yes.
also potentially EAP TLS and Cisco Leap.
Yes.
Cisco-
it's all coming. The EAP protocols. It's all coming back to me.
And it's a Microsoft protocol.
Yep.
So not new. Josh with Asleep under Cisco Leap did some very I can remember back in the day teaching the mechanisms of what went into MS Chat V2.
Right.
In that your password is divided into 3 chunks and it's done a single round of DES, not triple DES, single round of DES on each one of the chunks, and the last chunk is always padded, and so we can predictably calculate the end. So if you can generate possible a table, so you can do lookups by the last couple of bytes, then crack super fast.
And so is this new? This cracking MS Chat V2 NTLM V1 challenge response quickly using a database of NT hashes.
So the attack, in my opinion, is not new. Like right in the GitHub, it says it doesn't require the clear text password to be cracked. We just need the NT hash. And talks about MS Chat, splits the hash into 3 parts, so forth and so on. And is time memory trade-off for a rainbow table. So I'm not sure what the differences is here. The big one, to me it looks like a re-implementation of Asleep, which can be used standalone and all of those types of things.
It's like Asleep with rainbow tables, right?
Yeah.
But Asleep could do rainbow tables. Asleep could create those rainbow tables as well.
But not on the NT, not on the V1 exchange hash that's broken up, right? Like this is taking and breaking that optimization up, right?
Nope. You mean the breaking up, meaning the 7 character with the DES? No, Asleep would pre-calculate all of that.
Okay.
So, so it looks like a re-implementation of that. However, the thing that I think that that I do is pretty interesting in that they can create the word lists and rules and all that type of stuff to create massive rainbow tables using Hashcat and the output of Have I Been Pwned.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Sexy.
So to me,
That's a nice
where
upgrade.
that's where the sexy comes from.
So is it an optimization of the rainbow tables pre-calculated for this attack based on the Have I Been Pwned and building the database for easy optimization utilizing regular hardware? Like that's what it seems like.
It's what it seems like too.
Okay.
It looks like a process improvement, so you can crack
agreed.
them faster, basically.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And the ability to create the rainbow tables with Hashcat, so that you can calculate it once and
Yeah,
do
because
it better.
when Josh wrote Asleep, Hashcat didn't exist.
Correct.
Yeah.
It did
Right.
not.
Yeah.
It was all CPU based. So Asleep was for Cisco Leap, which leveraged MS Chat V2 in the air, unprotected. There was no MS Chat V2 attacks available at the time, and Josh wrote them.
Right.
My understanding was that there was one other thing that he based his work on, and I can't remember what it was off the top of my head.
Oh, yeah. It was like some kind of like book reference. It was something weird like that. Like someone in a book somewhere wrote a paragraph, and that was literally like the key to
No,
him.
that was the Oracle,
That was the
attack.
That was the Oracle attack. Yeah. I love stories like that, by the way.
But then later, Moxie Marlinspike effectively created a service to crack MS Chat V2 passwords, and I can't remember what the name of it was.
Oh, I remember that too.
And it used the techniques that Josh had researched and developed.
Yeah, because no one used Leap anymore, right? Because it went to EAP TLS, basically.
Yeah, I mean, no, it actually went to PEEP. No, I'm sorry. It went to
PEEP and then EAP TLS.
It went to EAP Fast on the Cisco side. So Leap was a Cisco proprietary protocol.
Right.
and Josh disclosed the vulnerabilities into Cisco Leap. That was when I met Josh.
That was
through Ocean.
Those were early days.
Through Ocean. And
that was a long time ago.
That was when we first met Josh.
And Josh was really sick. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that?
I do.
And that was because of all of the stress that he was under because Cisco threatened to sue him and take everything he owned, including making his family live under a bridge in a cardboard box and send him to prison.
Crazy.
Whoa.
Because he disclosed this to Cisco and said, "Hey, this is a problem. You should fix this." And they thought that Cisco thought he was going to extort them, so they sued him and threatened to take everything away.
So in the repo is the slides from DEF CON 29 with the talk, and in there is a picture of Josh's slides from DC 11 2003, where he looks like shit.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
And so the big story there. Eventually, Josh was able to release that, and Cisco basically says, "Yeah, we're working on a fix," and never went back to Josh and said, "Yeah, you can release this. We've got our fix." They just came out and announced that, "Hey, all of our Cisco customers, we have the latest and greatest Wi-Fi security authentication thing since sliced bread. You should probably upgrade from Cisco Leap to Eep Fast immediately." Oh, and by the way, in order to do so, you need to upgrade your access point hardware.
Yeah, because it's an opportunity.
Yep.
Yeah.
Whether or not it was or not. And Josh took that as his cue to say, "Yep, they fixed the problem. Here's their update. You should do Eep Fast." So then he released a Sleep. Yep. And a Sleep. So another fun story about a Sleep. Josh went to a customer. And they said, "Josh, we know you wrote a Sleep, but we can't get it to work."
Yeah.
And so we're going to challenge you that if we want you to break our Leap network, and if you can't break recover the password for users on our network, we don't pay for the assessment. But if you can, we'll pay you 3 times the regular quoted value. And Josh's comment was, "I wrote a Sleep. Like, I can make this work. Yeah, game on. Send me a packet capture or send me traffic." So they did. In Wireshark screenshots. Like boom. Yeah. And he's like, "Well, okay, fine. I read all of that stuff in from the packet capture and use it as variables in my program. So I'll just read it off the screenshot, and I'll make it so now I can define those variables from the command line. Thank you very much." And in about 3 minutes, he recovered their password.
That's awesome.
The reason why they couldn't make it work, they were using shitty dictionaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
That's funny. That is funny.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stories.
Last little bit. We're getting solar.
This is like the history of breaking cryptocography.
So we're getting solar installed in our house in about a month. And in order to do so, I had to clear 12 feet of wall space next to my panel because we're getting a couple Tesla power walls and all sorts of fun stuff. And in doing so, I had to clean out this bookcase that was in our basement. And I found a set of Sec 617 books.
Oh, not the original ones.
From when you and I took the class together.
It was funny when you said that you were offering the first iteration of IoT. And what is your class called?
IoT penetration testing.
And what is the URL? sans.org
Sec 556.
Sec 556. I immediately thought of when you and I sat in Josh's class, which I believe was the first time Josh taught 617, and we're just enamored with everything that he was saying, and recorded episode 1 of the podcast in Los Angeles.
Yep.
At that Sans event.
And I had the books that came from that class. And I know this because they had all the little tabs on the side. So when I took the cert, I knew how to look things up.
Yep.
2005.
And a lot of that information is still valid today because like those crypto protocols haven't
changed.
I mean, there's been new iterations of them, right?
But still in use. Additional encapsulation to some of the protocols.
Yeah.
The RF hasn't changed. The RF, the physical layer, hasn't changed. But you know what I did?
You tossed.
I recycled them.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's kind of
I had to.
Happy, sad at the same time, right?
Truth be told, when I took over authorship, the lead authorship of 617, Josh actually gave me a copy of those slides.
Right.
And he says, please don't judge me for any of this. These are awful. And I'm like, no, Josh, these are awesome,
No, they're
actually.
awesome. Yeah, it was an awesome class. I learned a lot.
Because we actually borrowed some of his content from the 2005 class 2 years ago and put it in the class.
Right. Yeah.
Because like the RF layer doesn't change.
Yeah, some shit just doesn't change.
Yeah.
A couple more stories I want to call out.
Yeah.
I like my story number 7, productivity tools for hacksaws, right? Although it's, got a corny kind of title with elite speak and stuff. I like articles like this because maybe they'll tell me about a tool that I haven't tried out. Sure enough, they did. There was one called Joplin that allows for note taking. You can copy and paste images. There's a VI mode, and it stores all of your stuff in your Dropbox account. So if you're using it across multiple systems, it stores it. It's free. It's open source. It has markdown language. I was like, you know what? For note taking, I was using Sublime, but it didn't easily have that mechanism where I could share it across multiple machines. And like for note taking and stuff, I thought this was pretty awesome.
Yeah, we tested that out a while back with some of our operational notes. It's actually fairly feature rich for an open source project.
Also, I thought it was a neat trick in Linux. You can switch your caps lock key to be your escape key if your escape key is too far away. And if you're using VI as your editor, that actually is a pretty handy little tip. I was like, I kind of like that because from early days in using computers, I'm like, what is the purpose of the caps lock key? It's so annoying, and especially if you're editing in VI, God forbid you hit the caps lock key by accident. Oh crap! Like all kinds of weird shit starts happening.
Yeah, and I hit the caps lock key when I mean to hit tab, but I actually find that I use caps lock reasonably.
When you need to yell at someone in Discord.
Yeah, when
I
you
get it.
Cruise control for cool. I mean, but is the escape key really that far away? And is it really far away enough to break 30 plus years of training as to where the damn escape key is on the keyboard?
Very true. I looked at my keyboard, Larry, because I've got a nice 10 keyless keyboard, and my escape key is not all that far away. So I think if you have the right keyboard, it's certainly a thing. What else do I want to call out? Well, we talked about the Microsoft one. Oh, a couple more open source things. So there was story number 10 was an article about how someone monitors SSH sessions with Prometheus and Grafana. Has anyone used Prometheus or Grafana? Did you know these existed? I'm right there with you if you didn't know what they were.
No.
Prometheus is a time series database for monitoring. Grafana allows you to, quote, query, visualize, alert on, and understand your data no matter where it's stored.
We used
those could be handy things, and he put it all together.
We used Grafana
I've
with
heard
Wayland.
about Grafana before.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but it's kind of very generalistic, right? You can apply to Grafana to just about anything.
Yes, you can.
I thought that was cool stuff to look into.
Yeah, we applied Grafana to GPS latitude and longitude as captured by a device from Wayland, from a device that should be in a static location. All of a sudden, if the Grafana graph jumps, that means all of a sudden your GPS location changed in a thing that was supposed to be in a static location.
I kind of use the show notes sometimes. Like we may not go into huge depth about these stories. It just flag stuff that like I might need later, right? Because I imagine like months from now, I'm gonna be talking to my coworker Adrian Sanabria, and we'll be like, I really need like a time series database for monitoring. I'm like, wait, I talked about that on a show. This is my database of stuff. Yeah.
For 16 years, I've been doing that.
Yes.
I think the wiki was a little bit more coercive to search, and now we've got the blog and the wiki to search. And some of them don't all.
It's just a matter if I want to take on the project of bringing those two together.
Fix it.
It's just, which is a data problem and not sexy, right? I'd rather work on cool.
There's developers in India that will do short money for that.
I do have some tech segment stuff coming up. I've got one-liners that you can run Nmap with the Vulner script and OpenVAS using containers, and I thought that was pretty handy. And like I kind of worked on it a little bit to be like, if I just want the one-liner, what should it be? So I'm going to put together a tech segment for our audience and hopefully put together a webcast where I'll go into a lot more detail on how to set all that stuff up. Because the setup takes a lot more time, to get to that point. Yeah. And also like how you analyze the data is another thing. I'm looking at some open source projects, which admittedly have a couple of bugs. they were responsive to some of our issues that we filed with them and fixed stuff. So some pretty cool open source stuff on the vulnerability management side that Adrian and I are looking at and collaborating on. So one of the last stories I want to talk about.
Lee's got one.
Lee, you go first because mine was silly.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you if we could save the silly one to the end. I actually had two I want to touch on really quick. One, yes, I'm trolling Joff with my number 5, but rather than poking at Australia, what it is in this one state in Western Australia, they were collecting contact tracing data. They had some flaws, but they fixed them. But they had their data accessed by legal mandate because they weren't clear on the legal protections, so they couldn't protect the data the way their customers were told they could. It's court order versus what you want to do. I mean, my heart goes out to these guys. I mean, come on. You've got it all set. You get it secure. You fix the security holes. You think you got it. You can do exactly what you said. And then a legal document says, give us the data. And then their auditor found them and said, what? You can't do that. So apparently the regulator wasn't aware of the legal constraint. And they've actually changed law because of this. And I just thought that, like I said, that's crazy. So know your data protection.
Yep. And Lee, your next story on that one, just real quick. The hyphenation threw me for a loop on this one because the Lazio region vaccine portal is held hostage by hackers. I read this is I just read the second line. It says 19 shot booking system. I'm like, shit, what vaccine did Italy get that they need 19 shots? But it's COVID-19. Like, oh shit.
I totally read it that way as well. I saw that and I was like, 19 freaking shots? What?
Freaking Italians.
Just on the privacy and control of your data, I appeared on episode 77 of the Privacy Please podcast with Cam and Gabe Gums. And one of the things that they ask you in this podcast is like, where do you see the future of privacy? And I described kind of two scenarios, right? There's this dystopian future where corporations have complete control of your data and are acting upon that basically so they profit but don't care whether you have a bad time or not, right? So your driving habits, the kind of clothing that you buy is monitored by your washing machine. Like in this really, privacy is thrown out the window. I'm like, the other extreme is we live in this utopian society where we maintain control over our data, that we're allowed and able to define what data is shared, how it's shared, who it's shared with. The companies have to disclose how the data is being used and who it's shared with. And if I want my data removed, I can do that. Kind of like GDPR on steroids, but for everyone to limit the control the corporations have over your data and give all of that control back to you. Lee, your story kind of reminded me of me comparing these two different scenarios. And I think coming down to, we're probably going to end up somewhere in between, right? And not in any extreme, but even as sometimes unoptimistic as I am about privacy, I do believe that giving people the option is the right thing. And allowing them to control and full disclosure is definitely the way to go. And, I gave the example I shared on the show a few weeks ago, my wife on the Dunkin' Donuts app. Like, if Dunkin' Donuts told me what they were doing with my data, and that was an acceptable level of risk to me for me to get free coffee, like that should be, like, you should agree with big corporations that, like, hey, that's cool. Where it gets shady and pisses people off is when the EULA is 18,000 pages long, and you don't know like what privacy you're giving up, but you're getting free coffee. Like, that's a bad scenario.
Yeah, there needs to be very clear and unambiguous statements that are put in front of people where they make that choice, and there's no question about it. It's like, you are trading your privacy for this benefit, and it needs to be. And I don't think that's that difficult to actually put forward. I really don't.
Yeah, I agree.
And you mentioned dystopian future. I think that's the dystopian present right now.
Yeah, certainly it is.
And it's already way too late for that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I think the lawyers have got us going by that one. Clearly around the lower nether reasons, the lawyers have a firm grip.
Whoa.
Otherwise known as gotcha by the balls?
Yeah.
That kind of. I was trying not to get too base.
Well, I mean, like Tuesday was National Grab Some Nuts Day. They didn't specify what kind of nuts, though. But in any case,
If I had known that, Larry, you should have texted me, because I would have gone to the dojo where I work out with all women and me, and I would have loved to throw that out there and said, "Hey, guess what, ladies?"
Yeah, Jeff, they wouldn't have been gentle. Just saying.
yeah, and Joff, it was probably just better that you stayed home and grabbed your own nuts.
Yeah.
Which, you did. We know you did anyways. So every day is grab some nuts day. So.
Lee, you had a second story before we talk
I
about
wanted
toilets.
to talk about my number one. I want to talk about Vulture.
I'm glad you don't want to talk about your number two.
Yes.
That could get awkward.
No, we already talked about.
We'll talk about the number two as the last story.
Yes.
Yeah. So the
Android malware.
Yeah. It's really kind of cool. It's called Vulture, and with a lot of the Android malware, they create an overlay that can capture your credentials. So it's sitting there between the app and the user. But these guys, what they did is they use an overlay to trick you to install their app and over provision it. But it's really doing is it's running VNC and capturing the keystrokes and the screens and sending them off to their server over in the cloud somewhere. So it's really hard to see that it's doing that, and it's really flexible. Instead of just capturing the one app that you've got the overlay for, it's capturing the whole freaking device wherever you're putting credentials.
So every password that you type in, it shows that letter on the screen, like for that fraction of a second. So you know that. Yep, and that's what
and
they
you've got the keystroke too.
Yep,
I've actually done that before on a point of sale device, just continually capturing screens.
It's funny they're using ngrok for the local VNC server side. I mean, it's very similar to some stuff we're doing.
ngrok is cool.
Slick.
I just played with
ngrok.
it in class. It's like, holy mackerel, that shit's neat.
Yeah,
ngrok
Google's got their
Pro is even better.
With Android. Google's got their work cut out, because on Pixel devices they can be better about security and updates, but it like all Linux, it's forked and used by Huawei and many other companies, and what does that security look like?
Lineage OS right here, baby.
Which is why I am excited for Pixel 6, which hopefully coming out this fall.
Yeah, so that's an interesting comment, Paul, because I've been sort of a OnePlus fan for a while.
Yeah,
but
OnePlus does a good job, though.
They do a really good job. They don't have all the crapware on there, but it is not original, pure, unadulterated Android, though. It is their version of the operating system.
As long as they keep up with it, but then you're kind of like, you're in the Debian world or any Linux distro that makes the decision for you how they treat bug fixes and or patch vulnerabilities.
Yeah,
right?
You're one step removed.
Yes.
That's the issue. And there's always going to be an intrinsic delay in that, and you're accepting that risk because you're not, But
that being said, OnePlus is a cool. I'd take that risk for a OnePlus device, Joff. I think it's super cool.
My latest one, it's a great device. I've been nothing but happy with them. But I've been tempted to go back to the Pixel. Been tempted.
Pixel 6 coming out in October.
Yeah. Did you, Paul? Did you ever think you'd see the day?
Yeah. What do you have an Android device?
Pixel 3.
Pixel 3.
Yep.
Nice.
What the hell?
My pen test phone. Don't worry. The 10 is still here and others for.
I take it all back.
Yep. Wiggle War Drive for wireless CTF.
Yeah. The Pixel platforms are great.
The Wiggle app only runs on Android.
And Pixel 3, 4s, and 5s are just, they're amazing pieces of technology.
It's funny. I show a bunch of guys that I work with, like, their day-to-day is Android, and they love it. But when they pen test mobile apps and that type of stuff, they will only pen test iOS because that environment for them pen testing is more familiar. Me, I use iOS every day. And I can hack the shit out of Android. Yeah. So the tables are turned. So this is my pen test phone. Unlock bootloader and lineage and all that fun stuff.
I totally get that, and I'm weird that way because I'll pen test Android and use an Android, but who knows? So, maybe I'm nuts.
I'm just enamored with the smart toilets for some reason because I think it's. It's weird. Like when we talk about every device that you have is a computer, and I think it's really weird to think of your toilet as a computer. It's just bizarre, right? So a university in South Korea has devised a toilet that turns human waste into power. And as a bonus incentive, each use rewards the poopers with a small amount of digital currency that they can trade in for a cup of coffee or noodles on campus, which is just bizarre.
Isn't that a continuous loop? If you're getting coffee,
yes, it is, because coffee makes you poop, right? And we've seen the mug. Yeah.
So the cryptocurrency is called honey in English. So this truly is
it's sweet. It's a sweet deal. Like I poop and I can go get more coffee. Like what?
And noodles.
Like what is better than that? So it pumps your excrement into an underground tank.
Digging.
Right? It pumps your excrement into an underground tank, which means it uses less water. Microorganisms break down the waste into methane, which is a usable source of energy. Energy can be used to create Bitcoin, which then is transferred to me, and I use my Bitcoin to go buy a cup of coffee or noodles or both.
And, it brings a whole new meaning to the term in the cryptocurrency deals is called shitcoin. Mm-hmm. Those are like the ones that are like worth like fractions of, millions of a fraction of a cent, and they're absolute crap. Safe moon. But this brings a whole new meaning to shitcoin. Because
you know what? I think skee ball machine.
Yeah. Yes.
I think that story actually makes my life feel very complete now. It's so many
crazy.
ways.
Right?
So Bill just had that analogy of like it's the tickets that come out of the skee ball machine. I'm like, would those be shit tickets, or is that what you wipe your ass with?
Oh boy.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
The little squares of toilet paper. It's called shit ticket. Never mind.
Oh right.
Never mind.
That's a great note to end the show on.
Like this reminds me so much of like a composting toilet that spits out Bitcoin.
If you're hacking it, like, and I message you, and I'm like, Larry, what are you doing? You're like, I'm hacking shit. Damn.
Yeah. All those pictures of a turd in a toilet bowl that I sent to Darren over the years could have been worth money.
Could have been worth. It generates energy,
Man, I tell you, this show's really gone down the toilet.
Yeah, it's going right down the drain.
Right down the shitter.
With that, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
I don't know if I can. Over and out. I gotta go.